"We haven't eaten since yesterday," a little girl whispered. 200 bikers filled the diner. "We haven't eaten since yesterday," the little girl whispered, and the booth went quiet. Around her, nearly 200 bikers packed the diner, wet leather and road grit, but her voice still sliced through the noise. "Before we continue, tell us in the comments where you are watching this from." Rain battered the windows of June's diner, turning the neon outside into a trembling smear of pink and blue. Every booth was full, the counter was stacked 3 deep, and helmets sat on tabletops like black shells. The Thunderrooks MC had been forced off the highway by the storm and poured into the only place still open. Grant Grit Maddox sat with his captains, back to the wall. He didn't stare. He watched. Hands, exits, the way people moved when they thought nobody important was looking. The girl slipped through the crowd like she'd practiced being invisible. She was maybe 9, soaked to the bone, jacket too big, eyes too old. A smaller boy trailed behind her, maybe 5, face raw from crying, shoes that didn't match. He kept his head down, like he already knew what hunger looked like in adult eyes. She stopped beside Grant because his seat was closest to the aisle. She didn't ask for money. She leaned in and whispered again, softer, like the words could get her punished. "We haven't eaten since yesterday." Grant's hand stayed on his coffee, but his fingers locked. He glanced at her wrist, thin with a bruise the shape of fingers. Moose, his biggest captain, saw it too and went stone still. "You lost, sweetheart?" Grant asked, calm. "No," she breathed. "I'm not lost." The boy bumped into her hip and clutched her jacket with both hands. His stomach growled loud enough that a couple of bikers at the next table looked over. Grant nodded toward the empty space beside him. "Sit, both of you." The girl didn't move. Her eyes flicked past Grant toward the back corner where the hallway to the bathrooms cut into shadow. "We can't," she said. "Why not?" Moose asked gently, which was terrifying coming from a man built like a refrigerator. The girl swallowed. The kitchen door swung open. A man stepped out, wiping his hands on a dish towel, ball cap low, sweatshirt damp from the storm. He saw the girl and smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "There you are," he said, loud enough for the diner to hear. "I told you not to wander." The girl's shoulders tightened. His gaze swept over Grant's table, taking in the patches, the size, the quiet confidence. He didn't flinch. That was its own warning. "Noah," he called sharp, "come here." The little boy's hands trembled. He didn't move. Grant didn't move either. "You her dad? That your business?" the man snapped. "It is if she's starving," Grant said. The room didn't go silent, but it changed. Conversations lowered. Forks slowed. People started listening without admitting they were listening. "They ate," the man said, too fast. "Kids say dumb stuff for attention." The girl stared at the table like she was trying to disappear into the wood. Moose leaned forward a fraction. "Funny. They don't look like kids who get attention." The man stepped closer to the booth. "Listen, I appreciate your concern, but we're fine. We don't need charity from—" His eyes caught the rook patch on Grant's vest. "From whatever you people are." Grant's voice stayed even. "We're customers, in a diner, trying to buy 2 kids a meal." The man's gaze snapped back to the girl, and for half a second, his mask slipped. Pure, impatient anger. "Come on," he said to her low. The girl's mouth opened. No sound came out. Then she did something small, almost invisible. Her hand slid down the side of the booth, like she needed the support. Her fingers curled, thumb tucked, fingers folded. "Help." Grant's pulse hit hard. He set his mug down carefully. "What's your name?" he asked, like he didn't already hear it. "Ava," she whispered. "That's Noah." Grant lifted his hand toward the waitress. Marlene had been running plates since the rooks arrived, tired eyes but sharp. 2 plates, Grant said, fast, and hot chocolate. Marlene hesitated, eyes flicking to the man. The man cut her off. "They're not ordering. We're leaving." Grant didn't raise his voice. "They're staying until they eat." The man's smile thinned. "You don't get to tell me what my kids do." Grant stood. No shove, no swagger. Just up, full height in that cramped booth, so the man had to look at him instead of through him. "Then prove it," Grant said. "Tell me your birthday." Ava flinched as if the question was a slap. The man blinked, jaw tightening. "Don't be stupid." Moose stood too. Then Tank, Then a few more rooks from nearby tables rising like a slow wave, not threatening, just present. 200 bikers didn't have to bark. They only had to take up space. The man's eyes darted. Kitchen, exit, back hallway, calculating. Marlene came anyway, hands shaking, and set down 2 plates, pancakes, butter melting, steam rising like a promise. Noah reached for them before he could stop himself. He tore off a piece and shoved it into his mouth, chewing too fast, tears leaking from the corners of his eyes from heat and relief. Ava stared at the food like it might explode. Grant sat back down, forcing normal into the air. "Eat," he told her. "Nobody's taken it away." The deputy didn't hurry. He stepped out of the hallway like this was his diner, badge catching the neon. Young, neat haircut, name tag, Deputy Harlan. His eyes went straight to Grant's patch, then to the man with the towel. The man relaxed the moment he saw him. "Evening, Harlan. Got a situation. These bikers are harassing my kids." Grant kept his hands open on the table. "2 kids said they haven't eaten since yesterday," he said. "She's got bruises." He's shaking. "That's the situation." Harlan glanced at Ava's wrist. He saw the finger-shaped bruise. He looked away. "Sir," he said to the man, "you want to leave?" "Yeah, right now." Harlan nodded like that was law. "Then you're leaving. You folks can't detain anybody." Grant's voice stayed even. "Ask her one question. Ask the girl if that's her dad." Harlan's smile showed up for a second, polite and empty. He bent slightly. "Sweetie, is this your dad?" Ava stared at the pancakes like they were poison. The man leaned close, just enough for his shadow to fall across her plate. "Tell him," he murmured. Ava's lips moved. "Yes," she whispered. Grant didn't look at Harlan. He looked at Ava. Blink once for yes, twice for no. The man's head snapped toward him. Ava blinked twice. Moose's chair scraped back. Harlan saw it too. His jaw tightened, then he smoothed his face back into calm. "Kid's scared," he said. "Big crowd, noise." Grant set his phone on the table, camera pointed up. "Then do it all in front of this." Harlan's eyes hardened. "Turn it off." "No." The man reached for Noah's shoulder. Noah flinched so hard his chair squealed, then grabbed a piece of pancake like it was the only thing in the world that belonged to him. Ava's fingers slipped beneath the edge of her plate. She moved like she was fixing a napkin. A small folded receipt slid into Grant's palm. Grant covered it without looking down. Harlan stepped closer, hand resting on his belt. "This ends now." The man's grip closed on Ava's upper arm. Ava winced and Noah started crying, quiet at first, then shaking. Harlan reached toward the boy. And that's when the diner changed again. Boots pushing back chairs, leather shifting, 200 bikers rising at once. Not a shout, not a rush, just a wall of bodies standing, every patch turned toward the booth. Even the locals at the counter went still, forks hovering in midair. Harlan's eyes widened despite himself. He pulled his radio up. "Dispatch," he said, voice tight. "Send units to June's Diner, now." The man with the towel smiled like he'd been waiting for that call. Grant finally unfolded the receipt in his fist. 3 words, written in a child's shaky print, "Don't let him." Harlan's radio crackled, and the sound was like gasoline hitting a flame. "Dispatch, send units to June's Diner, now." Grant didn't blink. He slid his phone closer to the edge of the table so the lens caught Harlan's badge, the man's hand on Ava's arm, Noah's tears, the whole scene in one frame. If this town wanted darkness, fine, he'd make them do it under a spotlight. Marlene stood frozen with a coffee pot in her hands, knuckles white. Behind her, the cook stopped moving entirely, spatula hovering above the grill like time had stalled. Ava's eyes were locked on Grant's palm where the receipt had disappeared. "Don't let him." 3 words that didn't belong to a kid unless someone had made her learn what begging meant. The man in the cap squeezed Ava's arm harder, and her face tightened like she'd swallowed pain instead of air. "All right," Grant said quietly, not to Harlan, straight to the man. "Let her eat, then you can talk." "We're done talking," the man snapped. "You want to play hero? Take it up with the law." Harlan's expression didn't change, but his stance did. Feet planted, shoulder angled, the kind of posture you take when you already decided how this ends. "You heard him," Harlan said. "Stand down and let the family leave." Moose exhaled once, slow. "You keep calling him family like it's a magic word." Tank's hands clenched at his sides, big enough to snap a chair leg in half without effort. A dozen rooks at the nearest tables had shifted into a loose ring without even thinking about it, bodies forming a buffer between the booth and the exits. The locals noticed. A man at the counter leaned to his wife and whispered something urgent. A teenager in a hoodie started filming, then thought better of it and shoved his phone into his pocket when Harlan looked his way. Grant lifted his palms, open, calm. "Nobody's touching anybody," he said. "We're going to keep this clean." The man snorted. "Clean? You roll in here with 200 of your buddies and think you can intimidate a town?" Grant's eyes stayed on Ava. A town shouldn't need intimidation to feed kids. Noah was still clutching a torn piece of pancake, chewing like he didn't believe he'd get another bite. Butter shined on his lips. His hands shook so badly the food kept breaking apart. The man reached for Noah's shoulder again. Noah flinched violently and slid under the table, knees bumping the metal support. A sound escaped him, half sob, half choke, like he'd learned to keep fear quiet. Grant felt something go cold behind his ribs. "Don't," Grant said. The man leaned down, voice low, meant only for the kids. But Grant caught the edge of it anyway. "I told you what happens when you embarrass me." Ava's eyes flooded. She didn't move. She didn't run. She just sat there like she'd accepted that running didn't work. Grant shifted just enough to block the man's reach without making it a shove. A simple repositioning, a human wall. Harlan's hand slid to his holster. The room tightened. 200 bikers didn't move forward, but every muscle in every body went ready. Grant's voice dropped. "Harlan, if you pull that, you're pulling it on camera." Harlan's jaw worked once. He glanced at Grant's phone and then at the teenager by the window who'd started filming again, this time braver because the rooks were standing. The man hissed, "Turn it off." Grant didn't. The front door banged open. Wind threw rain into the diner in a cold sheet. 2 more deputies came in, soaked, hands already on their belts. Behind them, an older man stepped through with slow confidence like he owned the storm itself. Broad shoulders, silver hair under a campaign-style cap, a clean sheriff's star pinned to a dry jacket. Sheriff Kellen. Grant had never met him, but he recognized the kind immediately. A man who smiled while he measured how much trouble you were worth. Kellen took one look at the packed diner, the standing bikers, the kids at the booth, and then he smiled at the man in the cap like they were cousins at a barbecue. "Well, well," Kellen said, voice carrying. "Seems the highway brought us a party." Harlan straightened. "Sheriff, these men are harassing a family, refusing to let them leave." Grant held the sheriff's gaze. 2 kids asked for food. That's what happened. Kellen walked closer, not hurried, hands loose at his sides. "Is that so?" He looked down at Ava, and his eyes softened in a way that felt practiced. "Honey, you okay?" Ava's lips parted. Her eyes flicked to the man's hand, still on her arm, fingers pressing into her sleeve. She didn't answer. Kellen turned his head slightly. "Sir," he said to the man, "you want to go?" The man nodded, playing his role. "Yeah, I want to take my kids home. These bikers are making a scene." Kellen sighed like he hated paperwork. "All right then." He faced Grant. "I'm going to ask you to back off and let the man take his children." Grant's voice stayed flat. "Ask her if she wants to go." Kellen's smile thinned. "We already did that." Grant tapped his phone. "And she blinked twice." The temperature dropped. Kellen held Grant's stare for a long beat, then glanced at the phone like it offended him. "You recording?" "I'm documenting," Grant said, "because something's wrong here." Kellen nodded slowly, as if considering. "Mr. Maddox, right?" He said the name like it had weight he'd known for a while. "Thunder Rooks." Grant didn't react. He didn't confirm. He didn't deny. Kellen continued anyway. "Let me explain something. This is a small town. We keep things peaceful. You and your club rolled in and turned a family dinner into a standoff." Moose rumbled, "Family dinner? Those kids are starving." Kellen's eyes slid to Moose, amused. "And you're a doctor now?" Moose took a single step forward. Not aggressive. Just enough to remind the sheriff what 200 bodies looked like up close. One of the deputies behind Kellen shifted, nervous. Kellen didn't. He simply raised his voice like a teacher correcting a classroom. "I'm not asking twice," Kellen said. "Sit down. Let the family leave, or we start making arrests." Tank's laugh was low and humorless. "For what? Buying pancakes?" Kellen's smile returned, sharper. "Disturbing the peace, obstruction, threatening an officer." He glanced at Grant's phone again. "And if you keep recording my deputies, we can add interference." Grant nodded once. "Good. Say all of that again, Sheriff. Right into the camera." Kellen's eyes hardened. The softness vanished. "Turn it off." Grant didn't move. Kellen leaned closer, voice quiet enough to feel intimate. "You're not in your city. You're in mine. You got caught in a storm, and you think you can rewrite the rules." Grant's voice dropped to match him. "I'm not here to rewrite anything. I'm here to make sure 2 kids don't vanish behind your badge." For the first time, Kellen's calm slipped. Not anger. Something uglier. Annoyance at being challenged in front of witnesses. He straightened and nodded at Harlan. "Remove them." Harlan stepped toward the booth. Moose moved, fast. He didn't touch Harlan. He just slid between him and the kids, shoulders wide, palms open like a bouncer blocking a door. Harlan stopped short, breath tight. "Move," Moose's voice was low. "You're not reaching for that boy." Kellen's eyes flicked across the diner. He saw the locals watching. He saw the teenager filming. He saw Marlene trembling behind the counter, and he saw Grant's phone. Kellen chose a different target. "Fine," he said louder. "Then we do it this way." He pointed at Moose. "You, under arrest for obstructing." The diner exploded, not with fists, but with sound. Chairs scraped. People shouted. Marlene gasped. Noah started crying again, harder this time, because suddenly every adult voice became a weapon. Grant lifted his hand high, sharp motion. "Nobody swings," he barked. The rooks froze on that command alone. They didn't obey Kellen. They obeyed Grant. Kellen signaled, and one deputy grabbed Moose's wrist. Moose didn't resist. He just looked at Grant, steady, like he was saying, "Do what you came to do." Harlan snapped cuffs on him with a little too much satisfaction. Noah's sobs turned into hiccuping panic. Ava's face went pale. The man in the cap tightened his grip on Ava and leaned down, whispering something that made her shoulders fold inward. Grant kept his eyes on Ava's hands. She was doing it again, fingers moving under the edge of the table, sliding something forward. Grant shifted his knee and let it fall into his palm without looking. A key card, white plastic, a faded logo stamped on it, something like a green leaf with a cross. A clinic. Grant closed his fist around it and forced his voice to stay calm. "Sheriff," Grant said, "you're arresting a man for standing between a deputy and a crying child." Kellen's grin was all teeth. "I'm arresting him because I can." He nodded at the man in the cap. "Take your kids and go." The man yanked Ava up. Noah scrambled out from under the table, face wet, and the man grabbed him by the collar like he was luggage. Ava's eyes met Grant's for a fraction of a second, and in that glance was the whole truth. If they left, they weren't coming back. Grant stepped forward, one step. Kellen raised a hand, stopping him like a traffic cop. "Next step," Kellen said softly, "and you'll spend the night in my jail. All of you." Grant held still. Because sometimes the only way to save someone was to let them walk away long enough to follow. The man dragged the kids toward the door. Noah turned his head once, reaching backward with a tiny hand, fingers opening and closing like he was trying to grab air. Ava didn't look back. The door swung open, and the storm swallowed them. The door slammed behind them, and the diner held its breath. For 2 full seconds, nobody moved, like the whole room was waiting to see if the storm would spit the kids back out. Then, Grant turned his head just enough to look at Kellen again. Moose stood cuffed beside the booth, calm in a way that made the deputies uneasy. His wrists were thick, the steel biting into skin that looked like it had never flinched at pain. Kellen adjusted his jacket like he'd just restored order to the universe. "Everybody sit down," he said. "Eat your food, let the weather pass, and don't make me come back in here." The teenager by the window kept filming, phone shaking. Harlan noticed and took one step toward him. "Don't," Grant said. Harlan paused. Grant's voice was steady, conversational, but it carried. "You touch that kid's phone, I put my entire club's cameras on your face until the day you retire." Kellen's smile came back tight at the edges. "Threats now?" "Promises," Grant replied. Kellen held the stare for a beat, then nodded to his deputies. "We're leaving. We've got a prisoner." Moose didn't look at Kellen. He looked at Grant. The message was in his eyes. Don't waste this. Grant's fingers were still closed around the keycard in his pocket, the plastic edge pressed into his palm like a reminder that Ava had risked everything to pass it. Kellen started toward the door with Moose between two deputies. Harlan stayed a half step behind, eyes flicking across the room, memorizing faces. Grant raised his phone and spoke clearly, like he was narrating a receipt. "Sheriff Kellen, Deputy Harlan. Moose is being taken for obstruction at June's Diner on," he checked the time, "9:47 p.m. If he's hurt, missing, or doesn't walk out, that's on you." Kellen stopped at the door and looked back. "You think the internet is going to save you?" Grant nodded once. "No, but it'll bury you." Kellen laughed softly like a man hearing a child threaten a bear. Then he pushed into the rain and disappeared. The diner didn't go back to normal. Marlene set the coffee pot down like it weighed 50 pounds. Her hands were shaking so badly she had to grip the counter to keep herself upright. Grant stepped toward her, lowering his voice. "You know those kids," Marlene swallowed. "I don't," Tank said quietly, and she flinched like he'd hit her. Tank softened his tone immediately. "Not don't talk, don't lie. You saw what we all saw." Marlene's eyes glistened. She glanced at the kitchen, then at the windows, like she expected deputies to storm back in. "They come in sometimes," she whispered. "Not often, always late, always quiet." "Who's they?" Grant asked. Marlene's mouth trembled. "People, families, men. They say it's a custody thing, a domestic. Sheriff says stay out of it." Grant held her gaze. "You ever see the mother?" Marlene hesitated, then nodded once. "A few times. Not lately." Grant's fist tightened around air. "Where do they take them?" Marlene shook her head, almost crying. "I don't know. I don't want to know. In a town like this, knowing is how you get swallowed." Grant leaned closer. "The girl gave me something." He didn't show the card yet. "Do you recognize a clinic logo? Green leaf? Cross?" Marlene went pale. Her eyes flicked toward the far end of town, even though the walls blocked everything. "St. Alara Family Clinic," she whispered. "They do charity care. Sheriff's wife runs their fundraiser every spring." Grant didn't respond. He just nodded once like a man filing a name into a drawer labeled WAR. He turned, scanning the room. "Cap," he called. A lean biker with a sharp face and a calmness that looked like military training stepped forward. "Yeah." "I need 2 teams," Grant said. "One stays here, keeps eyes on Marlene, keeps cameras rolling. Nobody drinks. Nobody runs their mouth." Cap nodded. Grant pointed to 3 others. Tank, a woman named Juno with a braid and a pistol-shaped calm in her posture, and a younger prospect named Miles, who carried tools like he expected to fix anything. "You're with me," Grant said. Juno's gaze was already on the rain-streaked window. "We following the man?" Grant nodded. "We're following the kids." Marlene grabbed Grant's sleeve suddenly, desperate. "If you follow them, they'll know. They watch the roads. They got people." Grant didn't look away. "Then we don't get seen." He stepped outside. The storm hit like a slap. Cold rain, wind pushing sideways, water running off the diner roof in sheets. The parking lot was a sea of reflections, headlights and neon wobbling on asphalt. The rooks didn't roar to life all at once. That would be a parade. They moved like a coordinated spill, a handful of bikes at a time, slipping out of the lot in staggered intervals. No revving, no show. Grant climbed into his truck instead of a bike. Less attention, more cover. Tank took shotgun. Juno slid into the back with a small bag and a phone rig already recording. Miles handed Grant a cheap dash cam. "Local store had one in stock," he said over the rain. "I paid cash." Grant plugged it in. "Good." They rolled out with their lights dimmed, trailing 2 minutes behind the sheriff's SUVs that had already disappeared into the black. Cap's voice came through an earpiece, low and controlled. "Team 1 in position at diner. Cameras up. Marlene's safe." Grant answered, "Copy." They reached the main road. The town was small, but it didn't feel sleepy. It felt awake in the wrong way. Too many curtains shifting, too many parked trucks with engines running, too many silhouettes under gas station awnings pretending they weren't watching the road. "Town's lit," Tank muttered, "like they're expecting trouble." Because they are, Grant said. A mile ahead, red taillights glowed through rain, an older pickup with a broken right brake light. It turned off toward a stretch of dark farmland. Grant slowed, letting another vehicle slip between them, an innocuous sedan, local plates. The sedan followed too, like it belonged there. Juno watched it. That's not random. No, Grant said, that's a tail. On them or on us. They turned off the main road, tires hissing on wet pavement. The landscape opened into fields and tree lines. No streetlights, only the truck's wipers beating time. Ava's keycard burned in Grant's pocket. The pickup ahead hit a pothole and swerved, then corrected. The sedan behind it kept distance like it knew every crack in the road. Tank leaned forward. If that's their watcher, they'll lead us into a trap. Grant didn't answer. His eyes locked on a shape in the darkness on the right, another vehicle parked just off the shoulder, lights off. As they passed, the engine coughed to life. Grant's pulse spiked. Hold on! The vehicle lurched out behind them, an SUV, dark, older model. It stayed unlit, a shadow in their mirrors. Juno's voice sharpened. We've got a follower. Grant didn't accelerate, not yet. He waited, letting the SUV commit. Another half-mile and the pickup ahead turned down a narrower road, half gravel, half mud. The sedan followed. Grant followed, still back. The SUV stayed on them. Now it was clear, they weren't the only hunters. Someone was herding. The gravel road cut through trees and dipped low near a creek. Rainwater washed over the surface in thin streams. Tank's hand hovered near the glove compartment. Say the word. Not yet, Grant said. We don't start a gunfight in the dark with kids at the end of the road. The pickup ahead slowed near a gate, metal chained with a hand-painted sign. Private property, no trespassing. Beyond it, faint lights, a barn outline, a farmhouse silhouette. The pickup stopped. The man got out. Even in the rain, Grant could see the way he moved, quick, nervous, like he couldn't wait to be done. He yanked the gate open. The sedan didn't stop. It rolled forward, through the gate, then continued past the barn like it had permission. Grant watched, jaw tight. That's their escort. The SUV behind Grant surged forward suddenly, not to pass, to hit. Grant saw it in the last second, the front end angling, tires spitting gravel, aiming for the truck's rear quarter. Now, Grant snapped. He jerked the wheel, letting the SUV clip them instead of broadside them. Metal screeched. The truck fishtailed, tires sliding in mud. Tank slammed his shoulder into the dash to keep balance. Juno braced, eyes wide but steady. They're trying to push us into the ditch. Grant fought the steering, wipers going frantic, rain blurring the world into smears of light. The SUV hit again, harder, trying to turn the truck sideways. Grant didn't brake. He accelerated. The truck's tires caught a strip of gravel, traction biting just enough. The engine growled. They surged forward, dragging the SUV into a moment where it had to choose. Keep ramming and risk losing control, or back off. It backed off, just for a breath. Tank twisted in his seat and pointed. Another one! Headlights flared ahead. Someone had been waiting on the side road, and now they pulled out in front, blocking the path like a lazy accident. Grant had two options: brake and get boxed in, or go where they didn't want him to. He chose a third. He yanked the wheel left, off the road. The truck slammed through wet grass and down a shallow embankment, suspension jolting. Water sprayed up like a wave. They hit mud, the wheels spinning, then biting. Tank cursed through clenched teeth. Juno grabbed the seat back with both hands, body steady. Behind them, the SUV followed. The blocking vehicle above angled to the edge, headlights sweeping like search beams. Grant aimed for the tree line, dark, uneven, unpredictable. The truck bounced over roots, branches scraping the sides, rain hammering the windshield. Grant, Tank shouted. We're gonna... Hold, Grant barked. He saw it, an old service path, barely visible, running along the creek. He turned onto it, tires slipping, then catching again. The SUV tried to mirror the turn but slid wide on the mud. For half a second, its headlights swept across the truck interior, bright, exposing faces. That was what they wanted, to see who it was. Grant realized too late. Juno, he snapped. Duck! But the light had already hit them. Someone in the SUV would have seen Grant's profile. Tank's bulk, the Rook's calm. The SUV corrected and surged again, angrier now. It wasn't just stopping a random tail. It was stopping them. Up ahead, the path narrowed near a cluster of rocks. Grant hit it fast, praying the truck's clearance would hold. The truck bounced violently. A sharp crack sounded from underneath. The steering went loose for a heartbeat, then grabbed again. Tank stared at Grant, grim. "We just broke something." Grant didn't answer. He kept the truck moving. The SUV behind clipped a rock and jolted, slowing. The blocking vehicle above couldn't follow off-road without risking a rollover. Grant used the moment, pushing through the trees until the ground rose, giving them cover. He killed the headlights. The world turned black. Only rain, only breathing, only the dull ticking of a stressed engine. The SUV's headlights swept the tree line behind them, searching. Grant whispered, "Nobody moves." They sat in darkness while the hunters hunted. The SUV rolled slowly, scanning. The other vehicle's lights stayed up on the road, impatient. Finally, the SUV turned back toward the gate, frustrated. Grant waited until the lights were gone, then exhaled. Tank's voice was low. "They know it's us now." Grant reached into his pocket and pulled out the keycard. He wiped rain from it with his thumb, revealing the faded logo again, Greenleaf and cross. "Good," Grant said, "because now I know it's them." He looked through the trees toward the faint glow of the farm buildings in the distance. Somewhere over there, Ava and Noah were being dragged into whatever the town called home. Grant slid the keycard into the dash slot like a promise. "Cap," he whispered into the earpiece, "we found where they took them, but they tried to run us off the road." A pause. Then Cap. "Understood. What's your status?" Grant stared into the rain-soaked darkness, listening for engines, for footsteps, for anything that meant they'd been found again. Then, from the direction of the farm, a sound cut through the storm, thin, sharp, unmistakable, a child screaming, and right as Grant reached for the door handle to go on foot, his phone buzzed in his lap with a notification from Team 1. "Moose just made it to the sheriff's station, and he's not alone." Grant's truck sat dead dark in the trees, rain drumming the roof like a warning. The scream from the farm had already been swallowed by wind, but it left something behind in the air, proof that Ava hadn't been exaggerating, and proof that whatever waited past that gate wasn't home. Tank's hands were clenched so hard his knuckles looked pale even in the dim glow of the dashboard. Juno had her phone rig out, recording the darkness like it mattered. In this town, it did. Grant pressed the earpiece tighter, voice barely above breath. "Cap, say that again." Cap's response came steady, controlled, too controlled for what he was saying. Moose arrived at the sheriff's station. They didn't take him inside alone. Kellen brought someone out to the lot, a woman. Grant's throat tightened. "Describe her." "She looks wrecked," Cap said. "Barefoot, wrapped in a thin blanket like she just came out of a cell, bruises on her neck. She's moving like she's scared of every sound." Tank whispered. "That's their leverage," Cap continued. "Kellen's making a show of it. Like, see what happens when you cause trouble. They've got her standing where our cameras can see her, but not close enough to talk." Grant stared through the windshield at the faint farm glow between trees. "Keep eyes on her. Nobody engages unless I say." "Copy." Juno leaned forward from the back seat, voice low but sharp. "If that's Ava's mom, she's at the station, not the farm." Grant didn't answer immediately. He turned the key just enough to power the dashboard light and pulled Ava's keycard from the slot. The green leaf with a cross, St. Alara Family Clinic, a place that sounded gentle and looked charitable on paper, a place that didn't need a keycard unless doors were meant to stay locked. "Town's running 2 sites," Grant said quietly. "Farm for intake, clinic for holding, station for intimidation." Tank's jaw flexed. "And the kids?" Grant's eyes stayed on the farm. "Still there." He opened the door and stepped out into the rain. The cold hit hard. Mud sucked at his boots. He moved through the trees with the kind of patience that came from knowing rushing was how you died. Tank followed. Juno slipped out last, phone rig hugged to her chest under her jacket. They didn't head toward the gate. The gate was a trap. They tracked parallel, staying inside the tree line, using the creek as cover. Every few yards, Grant stopped and listened. Engines, voices, dogs maybe, distant, angry. The farm sat on a rise, a cluster of buildings with too many lights for a place that claimed privacy. A barn with a new metal roof, A farmhouse with curtains drawn. A long shed behind it with no windows, and cars. Several. One looked like the sheriff's unmarked SUV. Grant's stomach turned. They crawled closer until they could see the yard through the rain. The pickup with the broken brake light was parked near the barn. The sedan that escorted it was closer to the farmhouse, wheels clean like it never touched mud. Two men stood under a porch awning smoking, their body language relaxed. Not farmers, guards. A third man crossed the yard carrying something small in his arms, too small for a sack, too limp for a dog. When he shifted, lightning flashed, and Grant saw a child's shoe dangling. Juno sucked in air through her teeth. Tank's hand moved toward his waistband. Grant stopped him with a finger, still, silent, absolute. They waited. The man carried the small body into the shed with no windows. The door opened, and for a split second, a harsh fluorescent light spilled out. Inside were metal hooks, chains, plastic tarps. Then the door shut. Grant's vision narrowed. "Cap," he whispered into the earpiece, "confirm the woman at the station is alive." Cap answered instantly like he'd been staring at her the whole time. "She's breathing, barely. Sheriff's standing close, talking to her." "What's he saying?" Cap hesitated. "Can't hear, but he's making sure she sees Moose, like he wants her to connect him to you." Grant looked at the farm again. "I need you to do something risky." "Say it." "Get a mic close enough to that woman to hear her name." A pause. Rain hissed. Then Cap. "Understood." Grant's gaze swept the farm perimeter. A camera pole near the barn, another near the shed, motion lights on corners, a dog pen by the fence line, empty but wet, like it had been used recently and moved. "There," Juno whispered, pointing. A narrow service road curled behind the barn into a thicket, barely visible. It wasn't guarded. People got lazy behind what they thought was untouchable power. Grant handed Juno the key card. "If we find a door, this gets us through." Juno nodded, sliding it into her pocket like a weapon. Tank leaned in, voice rough. "Grant, we can hit them. Now. We got enough muscle." Grant didn't look away from the shed. "And get the kids killed inside while we're outside playing tough." "No." He waited for the next shift, the next lazy step. A porch guard finished his cigarette and walked toward the barn, shoulder hunched against rain. The other stayed under the awning. Grant moved. He flowed through the tree line, keeping low, stepping where mud was already broken so it didn't splash. Tank and Juno followed, spaced out like shadows. They reached the edge of the yard. The barn loomed close now, huge and silent, rain running down the metal roof in sheets. A door on the side had a keypad, not a farmer's barn. Juno pulled the keycard out. "This won't open a keypad." Grant scanned. A wiring conduit ran from the keypad into the wall. Miles had always said, "Everything that locks can be unlocked. You just need time." They didn't have time. A sound came from inside the barn, something heavy dragged across concrete, then a muffled sob. Noah. Tank's face went feral. Grant touched Tank's arm, grounding him. "We don't blow this. We do it clean." Juno edged along the barn wall until she found a narrow window high up. It was fogged from inside heat, but when lightning flashed, they saw shadows moving. Men. More than two. And something small in the corner, huddled. Ava. Grant's chest tightened so hard it hurt. He pressed his mouth to the earpiece. "Cap, status." Cap came back, urgent now. "We got a read. The woman, she whispered her name when Kellen leaned close. It's Lila. Lila Hart." Grant's heart thumped once, hard. "Ava's last name is Hart," he said softly, like speaking it made it real. Cap continued. "Kellen just said something to her and pointed at our cameras. She started shaking. Moose tried to step toward her and Harlan shoved him back. They're doing this on purpose." Grant stared at the barn wall. "Kellen wants us to storm the station and look like animals." "Yeah," Cap said. "He wants a headline." Grant's mind clicked into place. Two sites, two traps, one solution. Split them without letting them choose the battlefield. "Cap," Grant said, "I'm sending you a name. St. Alara Family Clinic. Find it. Get eyes. Don't engage until I say." Cap didn't ask questions. "Copy. Moving." Grant looked at Juno. "We need inside that barn without setting off the yard." Juno's eyes flicked to the keypad conduit. "We can't cut power without lights popping and someone noticing." Tank's gaze went to the rain barrel line along the barn side. What about the roof? Grant followed his line. Rain, metal roof, gutters, a side ladder half hidden behind stacked hay bales. Grant nodded once. Roof. They moved to the hay bales, climbing in silence. Tank went first, muscles controlled. Grant followed. Juno last, phone rig strapped tight so it wouldn't clatter. They reached the ladder and started up, rain slicking every rung. Above them, thunder rolled like a warning. At the top, Grant hooked his hand over the roof edge and pulled himself onto the metal. The surface was slick as ice. He spread his weight and crawled, keeping low, moving like a man who'd learned how to survive on bad ground. Tank followed, then Juno. They reached a roof vent, square with a loose metal grate. Warm air pushed up from inside, smelling like animals and something chemical that didn't belong on a farm. Grant eased the grate up. It squealed. He froze. Inside, footsteps stopped. A voice barked, "You hear that?" Grant held still, breath trapped. Rain hammered louder. The wind picked up. After a long second, the footsteps resumed. Grant lowered his face to the vent and peered down. The barn interior was lit with harsh fluorescence. A row of stalls had been converted into cages with welded mesh. In one cage, 3 kids huddled together, thin arms wrapped around knees. Ava was there, face streaked with grime, eyes wide and dry like she'd run out of tears. Noah was on the floor near the cage door, hands tied behind his back with zip ties, a strip of duct tape half torn from his mouth. His cheeks were red from crying. His eyes were glassy with panic. 2 men stood over him arguing, irritated like he was a broken tool. "Should have kept him quiet," one said. "He wouldn't shut up," the other replied. "Boss said we move them tonight anyway." Tonight. Grant's stomach dropped. They weren't waiting for paperwork. They weren't waiting for the storm to pass. They were moving kids in the rain because the rain hid noise. Grant's fingers curled around the roof edge until metal bit skin. Juno looked at him, reading his face without words. "We need a distraction." Grant nodded slowly. "We need them looking away from that cage door for 10 seconds. Tank's voice came out like gravel. "I can give you 10. Grant grabbed Tank's sleeve, holding him back. "Not like that. Not with a fight in the barn. We need quiet." He thought fast, eyes scanning the ceiling beams. A fire extinguisher hung near the main entrance. A sprinkler pipe ran across the ceiling, old, rusty. A chain hoist dangled near the center, holding a heavy engine block on a hook. Grant looked at Juno's phone rig, then at the vent opening. "Record everything," he whispered. "Every face, every cage, every word." Juno nodded, angling her phone down through the vent. Grant pulled out his own phone and typed one message to Cap. "Kids in barn, moving tonight." Then he slid his phone back and turned to Tank. "When I say go, you drop to the awning and hit the porch guard. Silent, not dead, silent. Take his radio." Tank's eyes flared. He nodded once. Grant looked down through the vent again. Ava had shifted. She was staring up at the ceiling like she felt something. She knew they were near but couldn't risk hope. Grant's chest tightened. One of the men inside walked toward the cage door with a set of keys hanging from his belt. He squatted beside Noah, grabbed the duct tape, and yanked it off hard enough to make the boy cry out. "Shut up!" the man hissed. Noah choked on sobs. Ava slammed her hands against the cage mesh, whispering something frantic, too quiet to hear. The man turned, annoyed, and reached for Ava's cage lock. Grant whispered, "Now." Tank moved, sliding off the roof edge like a controlled fall, dropping toward the porch awning below with a silence that didn't match his size. Grant stayed at the vent, watching. Inside, the man's keys jingled as he lifted them to the lock, and outside, somewhere below, a soft thud. The porch guard's voice cut off mid-word. Grant didn't breathe. Juno's phone kept recording. Inside the barn, the men froze again. One lifted his head. "What was that?" The other shrugged, impatient, and shoved the key into the lock. The lock clicked. Ava's cage door started to swing open, and Grant heard a different sound cut through the rain, louder, closer, unmistakable. A siren coming from the road, not a single whoop, not a distant echo, a full-on approach, lights and sound, fast. Juno's head snapped toward Grant. "That's not us." Grant's blood went cold, because nobody in their club had called anyone, and if the sheriff's people were coming here with sirens, it meant one thing. They'd been made. The siren grew teeth as it closed the distance, blue and red strobes slicing through the rain beyond the tree line. It wasn't a random patrol. It was coming straight for the gate. Grant stared down through the vent as the man inside the barn started to open Ava's cage. "Stop," the other man snapped, suddenly alert. "You hear that?" The first man froze with the keys still in the lock. He tilted his head like a dog catching scent. Outside, the siren Dopplered closer, then another sound layered over it. Tires on wet gravel, fast and heavy. Not one vehicle, several. Juno's phone stayed pinned to the vent, recording every twitch, every face. Her breathing was controlled, but her eyes were lit with the same thought Grant had. This wasn't law enforcement responding to a crime. This was an extraction. Grant pressed his mouth to the earpiece. "Cap, we're burned. Whoever's coming, they're coming to the farm," Cap answered instantly, tense. "Copy. I'm 2 minutes from the clinic. Do you want me to abort?" Grant's mind sprinted. If Cap went into the clinic blind while the farm went hot, Kellen could box them in on both sides and paint it as a biker assault. But if Cap aborted, Lila stayed at the station and the clinic stayed dark, safe for the people who used it. "Hold where you are," Grant said. "Don't approach yet, just eyes." "Understood." Grant turned to Juno, voice barely audible under rain. "Zoom. Get faces." Juno adjusted her angle. The phone lens caught the two men below in crisp detail. One had a neck tattoo, the other wore a sheriff's department sweatshirt under a rain jacket. Not subtle, not civilian. Grant's stomach turned again. Tank's voice came faint through the earpiece, low and close. He'd taken the porch guard's radio and keyed into their line. "Porch guard down, alive, radio secured." "Good," Grant whispered. "Stay hidden." Tank didn't answer with words. He didn't need to. The siren suddenly cut off. Silence hit so hard it felt like pressure in the ears. Then headlights flooded the yard. 2 SUVs rolled through the gate without slowing, followed by a pickup with a light bar mounted behind the cab. They didn't announce. They didn't speak. They moved like a team that had done this before. Men jumped out, rain bouncing off their jackets. Flashlights snapped on. Rifles, short, compact, held low but ready. No uniforms, just patches and confidence. Grant watched from the roof vent as one of the arrivals strode to the barn door and slapped it twice. A coded knock. Inside, the man with the keys exhaled, relieved. "Finally," the other man muttered. "Took him long enough." Grant's blood went cold for a different reason. This was scheduled. Moving the kids tonight wasn't a panic move. It was the plan. The barn door opened and the arrivals poured in. Grant kept still, body flat to the roof, rain soaking his back through leather, while below, the barn filled with men like a flood. More voices, more boots, more flashlights swinging across cages. Noah's muffled crying turned into thin, terrified whimpers. Ava stood in the cage, fingers hooked through the mesh, eyes wide, staring at the men like she knew which ones would hurt first. Grant's fingers tightened on the roof edge until pain sharpened his focus. One of the new men, broad, older, a shaved head, looked straight up at the ceiling beams as if he felt something. Then he shrugged, unimpressed, and turned to the man with the keys. "Load 'em," Shaved Head ordered. "Now." A different man, younger, pulled out a phone and started recording the cages, like inventory, like proof of delivery. Grant leaned closer to the vent, listening. "Truck's ready," someone said. "Route's clear. Sheriff said state boys won't be out in this weather." State boys. Not local. Kellen had reach. The man with the keys yanked Noah up by the arm like he weighed nothing. Noah's feet dragged. He tried to scream through the duct tape, but only a wet sound came out. Ava slammed her hands on the mesh. Don't take him!" A hand cracked across her face so fast Grant barely registered it. Ava's head snapped sideways. She didn't fall. She just went quiet in that dead way kids go quiet when they learn noise costs. Grant swallowed something hot and metallic. Juno's jaw trembled. She didn't stop recording. Shaved Head nodded at the cages. "All of them. Same order. You know the list." Another man laughed. "Somebody's paying extra for the little boy, apparently." Noah twisted, eyes wild, searching the barn for anything familiar. He found nothing. Grant's chest tightened until it felt like his ribs might split. He whispered into the earpiece, controlled, but edged with steel. "Tank, I need you at the barn's main door. Quiet." You're going to create a problem outside that forces two men to peel off. Only two. Tank's response was immediate. Copy. Grant continued. Not gunfire. Something they can't ignore. A pause. Tank. Understood. Grant looked at Juno. When they open that barn door to move them, we drop in. Juno's eyes widened. Drop in where? Grant pointed at the chain hoist hanging near the center of the barn ceiling. We ride that down. Juno stared at him like he'd lost his mind, then nodded once, because there wasn't another option that didn't end with kids in a truck. Inside, the men started unhooking cage locks. The metal clanked. Ava flinched at every sound. The barn's big sliding door shuddered as someone began pulling it open. Cold rain blew in, and headlights from outside painted long, hard shadows across the floor. Grant's breath slowed. He adjusted his grip on the vent edge, feeling the slick metal, measuring the distance. He didn't have a rope. He didn't have time. He had gravity and timing and the fact that none of these men expected danger from above. Then it happened. Outside, a sudden engine roar cut through the rain. Not a bike, not a truck, a generator. The yard's floodlights flickered once, twice, then went out. Darkness swallowed the farmyard so fast the men inside the barn shouted in surprise. "What the hell?" someone barked. Flashlights snapped on in a panic. Beams jittered. Boots shuffled. The whole smooth operation hiccuped. Grant heard Tank's voice faint on a stolen radio channel, distorted. "Hey! Hey! Somebody's messing with your power!" Perfect. Two men near the barn entrance moved toward the door, flashlights swinging. "Go check it!" That was the peel-off Grant asked for. The big barn door slid open farther, and cold air poured in. In the confusion, one man shoved Noah toward the opening. Noah stumbled, almost fell, then caught himself, eyes darting. The duct tape had loosened at one corner. He could breathe just enough to make tiny sounds. Ava lunged forward, caught Noah's sleeve through the mesh, held on for half a second like she could anchor him with fingertips. Someone yanked her arm away. "Let's go," Shaved Head snapped. "Move!" Grant's whole body went tight, ready to drop. And then the porch guard's radio, still on Tank, crackled with a voice that wasn't Tank's. "Sheriff says we got company, bikes, in the trees." Grant froze, because that meant someone had eyes on them from outside, not just inside the barn, a trap within the trap. Juno's eyes met Grant's in the rain. She mouthed, "What now?" Grant's mind flipped through options at war speed. If they dropped in now, they might save Noah and Ava, maybe. But they'd die in the barn, and the rest of the kids would be loaded anyway. If they didn't drop in, Ava and Noah were gone within minutes. Grant pressed the earpiece. "Cap," he whispered, "I need a status on the clinic, right now." Cap's voice came back, breathy, like he'd started moving without being told. "I'm across the street. St. Alara is lit up, 2 vehicles in back. I can see security, private, not cops, and Grant, I see Deputy Harlan's cruiser behind the building." Grant's stomach sank. Harlan wasn't just a pawn. He was the bridge between law and the pipeline. Grant whispered, "Can you get the plate numbers?" Cap, "Already doing it." Inside the barn, Noah was shoved toward the door again. His feet slid on wet concrete. His eyes lifted for 1 second, up toward the ceiling beams, like some animal instinct told him danger was above. And Ava, still in the cage, did the same. Her gaze landed on the vent, right on Grant. Her eyes widened, not hope, warning. Because behind the men, deeper in the barn, another door had opened quietly, one Grant hadn't seen from the roof, and a man stepped in wearing a familiar dry jacket. Sheriff Kellen. He wasn't supposed to be here. Kellen's gaze swept the barn with calm ownership. Then his eyes lifted, slow and deliberate, to the ceiling, to the vent, to Grant. And Kellen smiled, like he'd been waiting for this exact moment. He raised his hand, 2 fingers, and pointed upward. "Up there," he said, almost pleasantly. "Get them off my roof." Grant's lungs locked. Flashlights snapped toward the beams. Boots shifted. Metal clanged as someone grabbed the ladder to the loft. Juno's phone was still recording, but her hand had started shaking. Grant leaned closer to her ear, voice flat and deadly calm. "When I say jump, you jump. Don't hesitate." Juno swallowed hard. "Where?" Grant didn't answer, because below, Kellen walked to Noah, crouched, and peeled the loose corner of duct tape away, just enough to speak directly into the boy's face. Noah's eyes went wide with terror. Kellen said something too quiet to hear over the rain. Then Noah started screaming anyway, the sound ripping through the barn like a blade, and Ava slammed her fists against the cage so hard her hands bled, and the men started climbing toward the rafters, fast, while Kellen kept smiling up at the vent like he was watching an animal in a trap. Grant didn't think. He moved. "Jump," he said. Juno's eyes flashed, one hard breath, and she went first, sliding her body through the vent opening like a knife through cloth. Grant grabbed her belt and guided her down to the nearest beam so she didn't drop straight into light. She landed silent, hugging the wood, phone rig pressed to her chest. Grant followed, shoulders scraping metal, rainwater dripping off his jacket onto the rafters. He got his weight onto the beam, then pulled the vent grate back into place above them, just enough to kill the obvious hole. Below, flashlights swung wildly. "Rafters!" someone shouted. "Get up there!" Boots pounded on the ladder. The barn's loft stairs creaked as bodies rushed upward. Kellen didn't move fast. He didn't have to. He stood by Noah, one hand on the boy's shoulder, like a proud host showing off his house. Noah was still screaming through torn tape, air turning the sound into something raw and animal. The other kids in cages started crying too, a chorus of panic that made the men inside swear and bark orders. Ava's hands were on the mesh, bleeding where she'd struck it. Her eyes kept snapping upward, tracking the beams, tracking Grant. Grant held her gaze for a heartbeat and made a small motion with two fingers. "Stay still." Ava swallowed and did something that broke him. She nodded like an adult. Juno's breath was tight beside him. She angled her phone down between beams, still recording. Faces, Kellen, cages, Noah's zip ties, everything. Grant's earpiece crackled. Tank's voice came in low and strained. "Power's down. They're on me. I'm pinned near the generator shed." "Do not engage," Grant whispered. Tank exhaled hard. "They're moving kids. Grant, I can hear them. Trucks are backing up." Grant scanned the barn interior. The sliding door was open. Beyond it, darkness and headlight beams from vehicles shifting into position. Men were forming a line to carry kids out fast. The ladder to the loft shuddered as someone climbed. Juno whispered, "They're coming right to us." Grant's eyes cut to the chain hoist hanging near center. The hook swung slightly in the draft. It was a heavy-duty rig meant to lift engines. It could lift a man, maybe two. He leaned to Juno's ear. "When they reach the loft, we move across beams to the hoist. Then we drop behind the cages." Juno's mouth opened slightly, then closed. She nodded once. A boot hit the loft floor. "Up here," a man shouted. Flashlights blasted across the rafters, beams skimming wood. One caught Juno's braid for half a second, a glint of wet hair. "There!" Grant lunged first, pushing Juno ahead of him along the beam. Wood creaked under sudden weight. A flashlight beam snapped toward them like a hunting dog. A shot rang out, not into them, into the beam. Splinters exploded inches from Grant's hand. The crack was deafening in the tight space. Juno flinched but didn't stop. Grant's boot slid on wet wood. He caught the next beam with his palm, pain shooting through his shoulder, and kept moving. Below, Kellen's voice rose, calm and pleased. "Easy. Don't hit the kids. Take them alive." Grant's jaw clenched. This wasn't a standoff anymore. This was a controlled hunt. They reached the hoist. The chain hung thick and greasy. Grant grabbed it, wrapped it once around his forearm to steady the swing, then hooked his boot on the next beam. Juno clipped her phone rig strap tighter so it wouldn't flop. "On three," Grant whispered. "One." Another shot cracked. The chain vibrated as a bullet struck metal. It screamed like a bell. "Two." Men were running across the loft toward them, boots thumping, breath loud, flashlights bouncing. "Three." Grant and Juno slid down the chain together. It wasn't a clean drop. The chain burned Grant's gloves. The hook clipped his shoulder. Juno's boot hit him in the thigh. They descended fast and hard, bodies tight, controlling the swing. They hit the barn floor behind a stack of feed bags and a tool cabinet, hidden from the main entrance by cages and chaos. Grant crouched low. Juno crouched beside him, phone still recording, hands steady now, because fear had burned into focus. The men in the loft shouted, confused. "Where'd they go?" "They dropped!" Flashlights swung downward. Beams cut across the barn floor like searchlights. For a moment, one skimmed the edge of their hiding spot, but it didn't catch them. Grant looked through the gap between feed bags. Noah was being dragged toward the door. Ava was still locked. And the other kids, 3, maybe 4, were being pulled from cages one by one, wrists zip-tied, heads shoved down, moved like contraband. Grant's mind calculated in cold steps. He could rush Noah. He could pull the boy free maybe. But then Ava would be left. The others would be loaded. And Kellen would shoot someone and blame the bikers. He needed the one thing Kellen couldn't fight. Time. Grant pressed the earpiece, whispering, "Cap, you have plates?" Cap's voice came back immediately. "Yes, 2 in back of clinic. One belongs to a private transport company out of state. The other is registered to a shell. And, Grant, Harlan just walked in through the back door." Grant's eyes flicked to Kellen. "He's coordinating. That means the clinic is active right now." Cap. "Yes," Grant whispered. "Do you have eyes on any kids at the clinic?" Cap paused, then, tense. "I can't see inside, but I hear movement, doors, someone crying, faint." Grant's pulse hammered. There were kids here, and kids there. Kellen had split them on purpose, so no single rescue could save them all. Grant stared at Ava's face through mesh. She looked at him again, silent, pleading without asking. Juno leaned close. "We can cut that cage lock." Grant glanced at the lock, padlock on a welded latch. "With what?" Juno's hand slipped into her bag. She pulled out a compact bolt cutter, small but heavy. "I don't travel without options." Grant nodded once. "Good." A man moved between them and Ava's cage, blocking sight. He was carrying a child, small, limp, head lolling. His grip was rough, like he didn't care if bones bruised. Grant's eyes went red. He forced himself to look away and focus. The sliding door was the choke point. Trucks were outside. If those kids got into the trucks, they were gone. Grant whispered into the earpiece, "Tank, can you disable a vehicle without a fire?" Tank's breath came harsh. "I can, but I'm close." Grant, "Pick the lead truck, only the lead." "Make it look like mechanical." Tank, "Copy." Grant turned to Juno. "We free Ava and Noah. We do not engage unless fired upon. Our goal is to get them out and disappear." Juno's eyes widened. "Disappear where?" "The gate. We don't go back through the gate," Grant said. "We go through the creek." Juno nodded, tight. Grant waited until the men formed up again, 2 carrying kids, 1 with a flashlight, 1 with zip ties, moving toward the door in a steady rhythm. Kellen stood to the side like an overseer. He wasn't carrying anyone. He was watching everything. Grant needed Kellen's eyes elsewhere. He glanced at the tool cabinet beside them, then at a shelf where containers sat. Oil, cleaner, something labeled with a hazard symbol. He grabbed a plastic jug and twisted the cap. The smell hit him sharp. Ammonia. Grant poured a thin line along the concrete in a half circle, then capped it again. Juno's brow furrowed. "What are you doing?" Grant's voice was a whisper. "Making eyes burn." He reached into his pocket for a lighter, thumbed it once, tiny flame sheltered by his palm. He touched it to the line. It didn't explode. It didn't flare bright. It smoked. A thin, invisible cloud rolled along the floor, creeping low, sliding toward the open door and the path the men were using. It wouldn't kill anyone. It would just make them cough, make their eyes water, make their flashlights wobble, make them lose rhythm. Within seconds, one man near the door coughed. "What the hell?" Another rubbed his eyes. "Something's in the air." Kellen turned his head, annoyed. "Move!" But the coughing spread. Kids started choking and sobbing harder. Men swore louder, flashlight beams jittering. That was Grant's window. He and Juno moved low and fast, hugging cages, staying behind the chaos. They reached Ava's cage. Ava's fingers were still hooked through the mesh. When she saw Grant close, her face twitched, hope trying to exist and being terrified of punishment. Grant didn't waste words. He pulled the bolt cutters from Juno's hands and positioned them on the padlock shackle. Ava whispered, barely audible, "Noah." Grant nodded without looking at her. "I know." He squeezed. The bolt cutters bit. Metal creaked. A shout snapped across the barn. "Hey, back there!" Flashlight beams swung toward them. Grant squeezed again. The shackle snapped. Juno grabbed the lock and pocketed it instantly. Grant swung the cage door open just enough. "Ava," he whispered, "move. Quiet." Ava stepped out, barefoot, trembling, hands bloodied. She didn't run. She moved like she expected a trap to snap if she moved wrong. Grant pulled her behind the feed bags. Juno wrapped Ava's hands with a clean cloth from her bag in one quick motion. Ava's eyes were huge. "They'll take him," she whispered. "I know," Grant said. "Where is he?" Ava pointed, shaking. "Door." Grant looked. Noah was at the edge of the barn threshold now, being dragged by the arm by the neck tattoo man. The boy's feet were slipping on wet concrete. The duct tape hung loose, and his mouth was open in silent, exhausted screams. Outside, an engine cranked hard, then sputtered again, then died. A man outside shouted, furious, "What the hell? It won't turn!" Tank. The line stalled. Men carrying kids stopped and turned their heads. Flashlights swung outward. Someone cursed and ran toward the lead truck. Kellen's face tightened. Not fear. Calculation. He stepped closer to the door, scanning the yard. Grant moved. He sprinted low, fast, closing the distance to Noah in 3 strides. He grabbed the boy's zip-tied wrists from behind and yanked him backward into the barn's shadow. Noah stumbled, almost fell, then slammed into Grant's chest. His eyes went wide, recognition of a stranger, then relief so sudden it almost knocked him out. The neck tattoo man spun, reaching for his waistband. Grant drove his shoulder into the man's ribs, not to win a fight, just to take the hand off the weapon. The man staggered, slammed into the doorframe, and Grant kept moving, dragging Noah with him. A flashlight beam snapped onto them. "There! They've got one!" The barn erupted. Boots pounded. Guns came up. Someone shouted Kellen's name. Grant hauled Noah behind the cages. Juno grabbed Ava and moved them toward the back corner where the windowless shed door was, because Grant had seen it open earlier, and he'd seen a corridor beyond it. If there was a back exit, it would be there. But as they reached it, the shed door swung open again, and this time, 2 men stepped out, blocking their path, rifles low, eyes hard. Juno froze. Ava's breath hitched. Noah clutched Grant's jacket like a lifeline. One of the men smiled, slow and mean. "You really thought you could walk out with inventory?" Grant lifted his hand slightly, keeping Noah behind him. Behind them, Kellen's voice cut through the chaos, calm as a prayer. "Bring me the children," Kellen said, "and don't damage my property." Grant's mind raced. No back exit, no time, guns in front, guns behind. And then Ava leaned in close to Grant's ear and whispered 3 words that changed everything. "There's a tunnel. There's a tunnel." Ava's whisper barely made it past Grant's ear, but it hit like a hammer. In the same breath, she shifted her eyes, not toward the men blocking the shed door, not toward Kellen's voice behind them, but down at the barn floor. Grant followed her gaze and saw it, a dark seam near the base of the tool cabinet, half hidden by a spill of feed and mud, not a crack in concrete, a cut, clean, deliberate, the kind you make for a hatch. The 2 men in front raised their rifles a fraction, impatient. "You heard the sheriff," the smiling one said. "Hand over the kids." Grant lifted his hands a little higher, palms out, the universal sign of compliance. He kept his body angled so Noah was covered by his torso and Ava by Juno's shoulder. "All right," Grant said, breathing steady. "All right." "Nobody needs to—" He took one small step back, like he was giving them space. Then another. The men followed, thinking they were hurting him. Juno understood instantly. She shifted with him, keeping Ava close, keeping her phone rig pointed down and away now so it wouldn't catch a beam and reflect. Noah trembled so hard Grant felt it through his jacket. Grant's boot slid over the seam. He stopped. Kellen's voice came again, closer. "Stop playing games." Grant dipped his chin like he was giving up. Then he dropped. He drove his heel down hard on the edge of the seam. The panel flexed. A hidden latch popped with a dull metal click. The hatch wasn't locked. It was weighted. Ava had known that. Grant grabbed the edge and yanked. The panel lifted just enough to reveal a square of darkness beneath, wet air rising up like a breath from underground, a tunnel. The men in front didn't understand what they were seeing for half a second. Then one of them shouted, "Hey!" Grant kicked the panel fully open. Juno shoved Ava forward without hesitation. Ava dropped into the black. Noah tried to back away, panic taking him, but Grant hooked an arm around the boy's chest and lifted him like a sack, lowering him fast. Noah disappeared into the hole, his small sob echoing once, then swallowed. Juno went next, swinging her legs down, one hand gripping the edge, the other keeping the phone rig pinned tight. The men lunged. Grant snapped the bolt cutters up, one brutal swing into the nearest rifle barrel. Metal clanged. The barrel jumped. The man cursed, momentarily offline. That half second was everything. Grant dropped into the hole after them. The underground air hit him cold and sour, like damp concrete and old rust. He landed on a narrow metal ladder bolted to the wall, boots slipping, hands catching rungs by instinct. Above, the hatch opening framed chaos, flashlight beams slicing through, faces appearing, Kellen's silhouette stepping into view like a man approaching a stage. Grant descended fast, 10 feet, then 15. He hit the bottom and spun, grabbing the ladder with one hand, reaching up with the other. The hatch stayed open. A flashlight beam stabbed down into the tunnel, bright enough to burn the eyes. Someone shouted, "They went down! Down here!" Kellen's voice followed, calm and pleased. "Seal it. Let them run." Seal it? Grant's blood iced. They didn't need to chase. They wanted him underground. A trap corridor, a kill box, a place where sound didn't travel. Ava's voice came from the darkness ahead, urgent. "This way! Hurry!" Grant shoved forward. The tunnel was narrow and low, concrete walls slick with moisture, pipes running along the ceiling. It wasn't ancient. It wasn't some old storm drain. It was built, and it ran exactly where this operation needed it to run, between farm and something else. Juno's phone light flicked on for 1 second, just enough to show the path. Grant hissed, "Off!" She killed it immediately. They moved by feel, hands on wall, boots sliding on wet concrete, breath loud in their own ears. Noah stumbled. Grant caught him before he hit the ground. The boy's zip ties were still on, wrists behind him. Grant fumbled in the dark with a pocket knife and sawed through them, careful not to cut skin. Noah's wrists came free. He rubbed them, crying silently now, exhausted. Ava led, sure-footed. "There's turns," she whispered. "2 turns in a door." "How do you know?" Grant asked. Ava's answer was bitter and flat. "I cleaned it." Grant's jaw clenched so hard it ached. Behind them, metal screamed. The hatch. Someone was dragging something heavy over it. A slab, a cover, sealing them in. Then, silence. Too quiet. Grant stopped, held up a hand. Juno froze. Ava froze. Noah pressed against Grant's leg. They listened. At first, only rainwater dripping through pipes. Then, a low mechanical hum, not from above, from ahead. A generator, underground, and another sound beneath it, faint, rhythmic. A train? No, not a train. An engine, a vehicle moving through a larger space. Grant whispered, "Door, Ava. Where is it?" Ava pointed ahead into the dark. "There." Grant moved forward slowly until his fingers found metal, cold, slick, a door frame set into concrete. He traced the edge. Keycard reader. Juno's breath hitched. She dug into her pocket and pulled out the St. Alara card with the green leaf and cross. "On 3, Grant whispered. "We open and we don't stop. No talking, no lights." Juno nodded, card ready. Grant counted with his fingers instead of words. 1, 2, 3. Juno swiped, a soft beep. The lock clicked. Grant pulled the door open a crack. Light spilled through, harsh fluorescent, white and clinical. And noise. Not barn noise, not storm noise, indoor noise, carts rolling, voices echoing, a TV somewhere playing too loud, the distant buzz of medical equipment. The tunnel didn't lead to safety. It led to the clinic. St. Alara. Grant eased the door open wider. They stepped into a service corridor lined with stacked boxes and medical waste bins. The smell was antiseptic and something rotten beneath it. Ava's face tightened. "This is where they took Mom," she whispered. Noah clung to Grant's jacket, eyes huge in the bright light. Grant motioned them forward. They moved down the corridor, hugging the wall, heading toward a corner where the sounds were louder. Voices, footsteps, doors opening and closing. Juno's phone rig stayed off, but the recording continued in darkness mode, audio and occasional flicker, enough to prove they were inside if they got one clean face. Grant peeked around the corner. He saw a nurse station, except no real nurses. 2 women in scrubs sat with laptops, but their posture wasn't care. It was paperwork, inventory. A man in a private security jacket stood beside them, arms crossed, pistol visible under his coat. and behind the station, a heavy door with a keypad and a sign that said, "Restricted, Patient Recovery." Grant knew before he opened it. Those weren't patients, those were people being stored. Ava grabbed his sleeve. "The back room. That's the back room." Grant held her gaze. "Do you know the code?" Ava shook her head, eyes shining. "They don't tell kids codes." Grant didn't flinch. He looked past her, down the corridor. A side hallway branched off toward a fire exit sign. At the end, a window showed rain streaking down and a faint glow of parking lot lights. An out. But if they left now, kids stayed inside. Lila stayed at the station, and Kellen would reroute everything the second he realized the tunnel door had opened. Grant's earpiece crackled suddenly. Cap's voice, urgent and whispered. "Grant, I'm still across from the clinic. Harlan just came out back with 2 men. They're loading something into the transport van. I think it's—" Cap cut off. A sharp thump sounded through the line, like a body hitting a wall. Then static. Juno's eyes snapped to Grant. "Cap?" Grant tried to speak into the earpiece. "Cap, respond." Nothing. Ava's breathing turned ragged. They caught him. Grant's mind did one cold calculation after another. Cap had eyes on the van, on Harlan, on the loading. If they caught Cap, they'd search him. If they searched him, they'd find his comms. If they found his comms, Kellen would know Grant was in the clinic, which meant the clock just hit 0. Grant pressed Noah behind him, Ava behind Juno, and made a decision without any theatrics, just a clean pivot toward the heavy door behind the nurse station. "We're not leaving," Grant whispered. "Not yet." Juno's jaw tightened. "We can't fight this whole building." "We're not fighting," Grant said. "We're stealing what they can't replace." Ava looked up, confused and desperate. "What?" Grant stared at the security guard, then at the laptops, then at the restricted door. "Proof," he said. "And people." He waited until the security guard shifted his weight and glanced down the hall, bored, routine. Then Grant moved, fast and silent, straight into the lit corridor like he belonged there, shoulders relaxed, face calm. He walked toward the station. The women in scrubs looked up, startled. The guard's hand dropped to his pistol. Grant raised his empty hand slightly like he was surrendering, and kept walking. Because behind him, Juno was already sliding the keycard into her palm like a blade, and Ava, with blood-wrapped hands and eyes full of fury, stepped forward too. And in that moment, from behind the restricted door, a muffled voice broke through, weak but unmistakably human. "Ava!" Ava froze, eyes wide. She whispered, "Mom." The security guard turned sharply toward the door, distracted for one fatal second. Grant lunged. Grant closed the distance in 2 steps. The security guard's hand was halfway to his pistol when Grant's shoulder slammed into his chest. Not a heroic tackle, just a hard, efficient hit that drove him back into the nurse station, knocking a laptop sideways. The guard's elbow clipped the counter, and his pistol stayed in the holster, because Grant pinned his wrist against the edge with brutal leverage. "Don't," Grant said, low, almost calm. One of the women in scrubs gasped and shot up from her chair. The other grabbed for a phone. Juno was already there. She didn't point a gun. She simply placed the bolt cutters on the desk in front of the woman's hand like a warning that didn't need words. "Sit," Juno said. The woman froze, eyes wide. Ava didn't move. She stood a few feet back, staring at the restricted door like it was the only thing in the world. From behind it, that weak voice came again, closer now, trembling with disbelief. "Ava, baby." Ava's throat worked. "Mom." Noah made a small sound, half sob, half question, then buried his face into Grant's side like he couldn't look at what hope might cost. Grant kept the guard pinned with his forearm, then flicked his eyes to the laptops. On screen were spreadsheets and names, rows, dates, transfer fields, a list, inventory. Juno understood instantly. She reached over, snapped photos of the screens with her phone, fast, 1, 2, 3, then pulled a USB stick from her bag and jammed it into the side of the nearest laptop. "Password," she said to the scrub woman, voice flat. I don't," the woman stammered. Juno leaned in, eyes cold. "You do." The woman's lips trembled. It's St. Alara 22, Juno typed. The laptop unlocked deeper folders. Grant heard the guard's breathing change, anger building. The guard tried to twist free. Grant drove his knee into the guard's thigh, sharp enough to stop motion, not enough to break. The guard grunted and went still, pain forcing compliance. "Listen," Grant said into the man's ear. "I don't want to hurt you, but if you reach again, I will." The guard's jaw clenched. He didn't answer. Juno dragged folders onto the USB, invoices, transport logs, intake forms, camera timestamps, names with ages beside them, routes, payments, a network in plain text. Ava took one step toward the restricted door. The scrub woman snapped, "You can't go in there." Ava turned her head slowly. Her eyes were dry and bright, full of something older than fear. "Watch me." Grant released the guard just enough to keep him pinned under the counter edge and reached for the door's keypad. "No code," he murmured. Juno's hand flashed her keycard. Different lock. Grant scanned the wall. A metal plate, a magnetic lock line. If the power was cut, it would release or fail secure. Either way, they didn't have time to test. Noah whispered, "Please." Grant looked at the fire exit sign down the side hallway. The out was still there, but the moment they made noise at that door, the building would wake up. And the building wasn't empty. Cap had been grabbed outside. Harlan was here. Kellen's people would be running both ends. Grant lowered his voice to Juno. 2 minutes. Get what you can. Then we move. Juno nodded without looking up. 30 seconds. Grant shifted his weight off the guard and grabbed the man's jacket collar, yanking him upright just enough to force his eyes to the restricted door. "That door," Grant said. "How do you open it?" The guard swallowed. His bravado cracked under pressure. "Key fob, staff fob." Grant's eyes flicked to the scrub women. "One of you has it." The second scrub woman, the quieter one, shook her head fast. "No, we don't go back there." Grant leaned in. "Then who does?" She stared at him, lips trembling, then whispered, "Harlan." Grant's blood ran cold again. Of course it was Harlan. Juno yanked the USB free and pocketed it. "Got enough." Ava pressed her palm against the restricted door. Her wrapped hands left a faint smudge on the metal. "Mom," she whispered again, voice breaking now. "I'm here." The door answered with a soft thud, someone inside hitting it weakly, like they'd spent too long without strength. Grant made the decision for all of them. "We take the station," he said. Juno snapped her head toward him. "What?" "The station has Lila," Grant said. "Kellen put her there as bait, but it's also where they think we'll never go clean. They think we'll storm it loud." Ava looked between them, desperate. "But my mom is—" "I heard her," Grant said, voice firm, "and we're coming back for her. But right now we need Harlan's fob and we need Cap alive. Because if Cap talks under pressure, they'll bury this clinic before dawn." Noah whispered, "Cap?" Grant looked down at him. "Friend." Juno's eyes narrowed, calculating. "How do we take a station quietly?" Grant pointed down the corridor toward the tunnel door they came through. "We don't go out front, we go under." Ava's head snapped up. "The tunnel goes both ways." Grant nodded. "Exactly. It runs from farm to clinic. If Kellen built one tunnel, he built more than one. Towns like this always have a back route to the station." Ava hesitated, then whispered, "There's another branch, past the clinic door, the one they told me never to touch." Grant's chest tightened. "Show me." They moved, fast, silent, back into the service corridor. Juno kept her phone rig on audio only, recording their steps and breaths and any voice that might later matter. Grant didn't bother tying the guard. He didn't have to. The guard was in shock and pain, and the scrub women were too terrified to be brave. They reached the tunnel door. Ava swiped the keycard like she'd done it 100 times. The door clicked open. Darkness swallowed them again. As they descended the ladder, the building noises faded behind them. The tunnel air wrapped around their faces, wet, cold, and thick with the smell of secrets. They moved deeper than before. Ava guided them past the first turn, then the second, then stopped at a third path, one they hadn't taken earlier. A warning sign was bolted to the wall. "Authorized personnel only." Ava's voice shook. "This way." Grant listened. He heard it now, faint, distant, a different kind of hum. Not clinic, not farm, electrical buzz, ventilation, a building. They followed the branch until the tunnel widened into a concrete corridor with old pipes and a grated drain in the floor. Water trickled past their boots. At the end was another door, thicker than the clinic one. This one had no keycard reader. It had a simple deadbolt, a door meant for someone inside to open. Grant pressed his ear to it. On the other side, voices, mail, familiar cadence, police radios, sheriff's station. Grant's pulse steadied into something colder. He looked at Juno. "Phone ready?" Juno nodded. Grant looked at Ava and Noah. "When we open, you stay behind me. You don't run unless I tell you. You don't speak unless I ask." Ava nodded, jaw tight. Noah nodded too, eyes big, trusting because he didn't have another choice. Grant reached for the bolt. Then, on the other side of the door, he heard Kellen's voice, clearer than it should have been. "So," Kellen was saying, relaxed, "did you find our little friend outside the clinic?" A second voice answered, Harlan's. "Yes, sir, he's in the back room. Phone and comms are secured." Grant's eyes locked on Juno's. Cap was alive, but trapped. And Kellen was here, at the station, not at the farm, which meant he'd moved fast, because he already knew where Grant would go next. Grant slowly turned the deadbolt anyway. It clicked. He eased the door open an inch. Light spilled out from the station hallway, yellow, stale, buzzing. And the first thing Grant saw through the crack wasn't a deputy. It was Moose. Moose was on his knees in the hallway, hands cuffed behind him, face bruised, eyes still calm. And behind Moose, half hidden by a doorway, a woman in a blanket stood trembling, barefoot, bruised, barely holding herself upright. Lila Hart. She lifted her head at the sound of the door. Her eyes widened, not at Grant, at Ava, because Ava had leaned forward into the crack of light, and the moment Lila saw her daughter, she made a sound that was half sob, half prayer. And Kellen turned his head toward the tunnel door, smile fading into something sharp. "Close that," Kellen said softly. Too late. The tunnel door swung wider. Grant stepped through. Grant stepped into the station like he belonged there. Not swaggering, not loud, just a man walking into a hallway with a plan, shoulders squared, hands visible. Juno followed a step behind with Ava, and Noah tucked close, half hidden by her body. The tunnel door stayed cracked behind them, a strip of darkness they could fall back into if things went wrong. Things were already wrong. Moose was on his knees in the hallway, wrists cuffed behind him, a bruise blooming across his cheekbone. He looked up at Grant and gave the smallest shake of his head. "Don't make this about me." Lila stood in the doorway on the right, wrapped in a thin blanket, trembling so hard her teeth clicked. Her eyes locked on Ava and went glassy with shock. "Ava," Lila whispered, like saying the name might break reality. Ava surged forward by instinct. Grant caught her gently by the shoulder. "Not yet," he whispered. "Look at me. Not yet." Ava froze, breath shaking, eyes wet now. At the far end of the hallway, Sheriff Kellen turned fully toward them. The friendly mask was gone. The smile was still there, but it wasn't for comfort anymore. It was for control. "Well," Kellen said softly, "you're persistent." Deputy Harlan stood near a backroom door with a keypad, posture relaxed, one hand resting near his belt. Two other deputies flanked him, watching Grant the way men watch a dog they expect to bite. Harlan's gaze slid to Ava, then to Lila, then back to Grant. "You brought children into a crime scene," he said, voice measured. "That's not smart." Grant kept his hands open. "Release Moose. Release the woman. Release my man." Kellen's head tilted, amused. "Your man?" Grant's eyes didn't leave Kellen. "Cap, you grabbed him outside the clinic." Harlan didn't blink. Kellen did. Just a flicker. That was all Grant needed. Confirmation. Kellen stepped forward 2 slow paces, boots squeaking faintly on the station tile. "I'm going to make you an offer," he said, like he was doing Grant a favor. "You walk out that tunnel. You take your little club and go back where you came from. And I'll let your friend—" He nodded at Moose without looking. "And this unfortunate woman—" His eyes drifted to Lila. "Recover." Lila flinched at the word recover. She looked like she'd heard it in a very different context. Ava's fists clenched, bandages darkening with blood again. Grant stayed calm. "And the kids in your barn?" Kellen's smile widened a fraction. "What barn?" Juno's phone was still recording, audio and the occasional flash of light when it caught a reflection. Grant didn't mention it. He didn't need to. He took a half step, just enough to bring Kellen's focus fully onto him. That's the problem, Sheriff, Grant said. You're used to people arguing about truth. I'm not. Kellen's eyes narrowed. What does that mean? Grant didn't answer immediately. He turned his head slightly and spoke toward the desk area at the front of the station, where a tired civilian clerk sat frozen, hands hovering above a keyboard, eyes wide. Ma'am, Grant said, polite, is that security camera recording? The clerk swallowed, glanced at Kellen, then nodded faintly. Kellen's jaw tightened. Don't talk to my staff. Grant's voice stayed even. Good. Then let's be very clear for your recording. He raised his phone, not pointing it like a weapon, just holding it chest high where it could see and hear. My name is Grant Maddox, he said calmly. I'm in the sheriff's station because 2 children in your town asked for food and blinked twice when asked if a man was their father. My friend was arrested for standing between a deputy and a crying child. My other friend was taken outside a clinic, and I have evidence of child trafficking linked to St. Alara Family Clinic. The hallway went still. Harlan's eyes flicked, fast, to Kellen. Kellen didn't look away from Grant. You're making serious accusations, Kellen said, voice softer now, dangerous. You know what happens to people who lie about that? Grant nodded. That's why I'm not lying. He looked at Juno. USB. Juno slipped the USB stick from her pocket and held it up between 2 fingers, visible to the station camera. Kellen's eyes tracked it like it was a snake. Grant continued, voice clear. Transport logs, names, dates, routes, payments. You can arrest me right now, but that file leaves this building. Kellen's smile twitched. How? Grant didn't move his gaze. Because my club doesn't travel alone. Kellen's eyes flicked toward the front windows instinctively. Outside, the storm still raged. But through the glass, faint in the rain, there was movement. Shadows of bikes and trucks positioning quietly, unseen by most of the town. Not a show. A perimeter. Kellen recovered, voice sharp. You think you're intimidating me in my station? Grant's voice dropped. No, I'm giving you a choice that keeps kids alive. Harlan shifted his weight. Sheriff, we should... Kellen raised a hand, silencing him. He kept his eyes on Grant, but he spoke to his deputies like they were tools. Close the tunnel door, Kellen said. One deputy moved toward it. Grant's voice cut in, calm and deadly. If you close that door, my people outside start recording every window, every plate, every face that enters and exits, and the next call won't be to your dispatcher, it'll be to the state. Kellen's nostrils flared. State won't come out in this weather. Grant nodded once. Federal will. That landed. Harlan's jaw clenched. He didn't like the word federal. Nobody in a small-town machine likes the word federal. Ava's breath hitched beside Juno. Mom, she whispered again, barely there. Lila took one step forward, shaking. Ava, she tried, voice cracking. Kellen's eyes snapped to her. Stay where you are. Lila froze immediately, body obeying old fear. Grant saw it. So did Ava. Ava's face hardened into something new, anger with a spine. Grant looked at Kellen. Let her go, Kellen smiled. Or what? Grant nodded toward the hall camera. Or the next thing I say is your name, her name, the clinic name, and the fact you're holding a witness under duress, and then I stream it. Kellen took one step closer, lowering his voice. You stream it, and I say you broke into my station and threatened my deputies with a biker gang. Who do you think they'll believe? Grant didn't blink. The files. Kellen's smile vanished. Files can disappear. Grant glanced at Juno. She lifted her own phone slightly, just enough to show a live upload bar creeping across the screen. Kellen's eyes narrowed. You're bluffing. Juno's voice was flat. Already sending. That was partially true and fully useful. Kellen's gaze flicked to Harlan. Get it, he said. Harlan moved fast, too fast for the backroom door with the keypad. He punched in a code from muscle memory and disappeared inside. Grant's eyes tracked him, then snapped back to Kellen. That's Cap. Kellen didn't deny it. He didn't need to. Ava suddenly whispered, frantic. He's going to hurt him. Grant's voice stayed calm for her sake. Not if we control the room. He looked at Moose. Can you stand? Moose lifted his chin. Yeah. Grant nodded once. When I say, you move. The backroom door opened again. Harlan came out, dragging Cap by the collar like a piece of equipment. Cap's face was bruised, one eye swelling, but he was conscious. He saw Grant and gave the smallest nod, still here. Then Cap's gaze flicked to the USB in Juno's hand and sharpened with understanding. Harlan shoved Cap down beside Moose. "There," Harlan said. "He's alive. Now leave." Grant held Kellen's eyes. "Uncuff them." Kellen chuckled. "No." Grant's expression didn't change. "Then we don't move." A beat. Kellen's gaze slid toward Lila again, then to Ava, then back to Grant, as if he was weighing the value of each life like numbers. Finally, Kellen spoke to Harlan without looking away from Grant. "Uncuff the biker, not the other one." Harlan hesitated. Kellen's voice sharpened. "Now." Harlan knelt, keying Moose's cuffs. Grant's muscles stayed relaxed, but his mind tightened to a point. He watched every hand, every twitch. Moose's cuffs clicked open. Moose didn't stand yet. He stayed low, ready. Kellen's eyes glittered. "See? Cooperation." Grant nodded, as if grateful. "Good. Now, Lila." Kellen's smile returned. "No." And that's when Ava stepped out from behind Juno, small body, bandaged hands, shaking knees. And she pointed at Kellen with a certainty that made the room tilt. "You're lying," she said, voice loud enough for the station camera. "That man isn't my dad. You know it. You told him to take us. You told him what happens if I talk. And you said my mom would recover if I behaved." The clerk at the front desk stared at Ava like she'd never seen a child speak like that. Kellen's face stayed calm, but something behind his eyes hardened. "Sweetheart," Kellen said gently, "you're confused." Ava shook her head. "No, I'm done." Grant didn't move to stop her. He let her talk, because Kellen's whole system depended on kids staying quiet. Ava's voice rose, shaking but clear. "The barn has cages. Noah was tied up. Men hit me. They said they were moving us tonight. There's a tunnel to the clinic. I cleaned it. My mom is in the back room at the clinic. I heard her." Silence. Even the radios seemed to stop breathing. Kellen's eyes narrowed, and Grant saw it. The moment the sheriff decided, he couldn't let Ava keep speaking. Kellen lifted his hand slightly, the smallest signal. Harlan's posture changed. Grant's voice cut through, sharp. "Juno, upload." Juno's thumb moved. Kellen took a step forward, faster now. "Stop!" Moose moved. He surged up from his knees and slammed his shoulder into Harlan before Harlan's hand could reach his weapon. Not a brawl, a clean, controlled hit that pinned Harlan against the wall and trapped his arm. Cap rolled away on instinct, crawling toward the tunnel door. The station exploded into motion, deputies shouting, chairs scraping, the clerk screaming. Grant grabbed Ava and Noah and yanked them behind the front desk as cover. Juno dove too, phone clutched tight. Kellen roared, "Shut it down!" And in that chaos a shot cracked, not into the ceiling, into the hallway wall, too close to Cap's head. Cap flinched hard, but he kept moving. Grant's heart slammed, because whoever fired didn't fire to scare. They fired to end the problem. And the problem, right now, was anyone who could walk out of that tunnel alive. The shot punched plaster and tile and sent a sharp white dust cloud into the station lights. The sound hit Ava like a physical blow. She clamped her hands over her ears, eyes huge. Noah curled into a ball behind the front desk, shaking. Grant kept them low with one arm while his other hand stayed empty and visible. No weapon, no excuse. He wasn't here to win a shootout. He was here to get people out alive and keep the truth intact. Moose had Harlan pinned against the wall, forearm locked across Harlan's chest. Harlan's face was red with effort and surprise. He tried to reach his radio. Moose knocked his wrist away without looking. Cap crawled toward the tunnel door, blood at his lip, one eye swelling shut. He moved like a man who understood seconds. Juno's phone vibrated in her palm. The upload bar jumped, stuttering under bad signal, but moving. Kellen stood in the open hallway like he owned chaos too, voice cutting through it. "Drop your phones!" he roared at his deputies. "Lock it down!" Another deputy, taller, nervous, raised his pistol toward the front desk. Grant's voice snapped out hard. "Don't!" The deputy hesitated for a fraction. That fraction was the only mercy anyone got. Outside, an engine roared, then another, then a cluster, like thunder answering thunder. The storm masked it, but the vibration reached the building, the rooks. They hadn't come to start a riot. They'd come to make sure nobody disappeared quietly. The front doors of the station rattled as someone outside shouted, "Sheriff, open up!" Kellen's head turned sharply toward the sound. His jaw tightened. He didn't expect them to move yet. He expected them to wait. Grant used the moment. "Cap!" he hissed. "Tunnel, now!" Cap pushed up to his knees and grabbed the tunnel door handle. It was half closed already. Someone had tried to swing it shut in the chaos. Cap shoved it open, and the black mouth of the tunnel yawned. Moose grunted, still pinning Harlan. "Grant, leave him," Grant said. Moose's eyes flashed. "He'll shoot you in the back." "Then he'll do it on camera," Grant replied, and glanced at the ceiling cam. Moose understood. He released Harlan abruptly and shoved him backward into a filing cabinet. Papers exploded out. Harlan stumbled, cursing. Grant grabbed Ava's shoulder. "You first," he said low. "Go with Juno." Ava's voice shook. "Mom?" Grant leaned close until she could see his eyes. "I know, but if you get caught, we lose her forever. You understand me?" Ava swallowed, then nodded once, hard. Juno took Ava and Noah by the collars of their jackets and pulled them toward the tunnel door. Noah tried to stand, slipped on tile, then got dragged upright by pure momentum. Cap stumbled in behind them, his rear cover, breathing ragged. Kellen saw the movement and snapped his head back. "Stop them!" A deputy fired again, this time into the floor ahead of the tunnel door, trying to block the path. The bullet sparked off tile. Ava screamed. Grant lunged, slammed his shoulder into the deputy's arm, knocking the muzzle up without grabbing the gun. The shot that followed punched into the ceiling instead. Grant felt plaster dust rain onto his hair. He didn't stop. He shoved past and threw his body between the gun and the kids. "Move!" he barked. Juno shoved Ava into the tunnel. Ava vanished into black. Noah followed, sobbing, stumbling down the ladder. Juno dropped in after him, boots clanging once, too loud, but no one had time to aim down a hole. Cap dropped next, sliding down the ladder with a grunt. Grant backed toward the tunnel door, eyes on Kellen. Kellen's face was locked into fury now, the polite sheriff gone. He raised his own pistol, not toward Grant's chest, toward Lila. Lila stood trembling in the doorway, still wrapped in her blanket, frozen like prey. Kellen grabbed her by the arm and yanked her into the hallway, putting the gun to her head like a badge meant nothing. "Stop!" Kellen shouted. "Or she dies." Ava's scream echoed from the tunnel below. "Mom!" Grant froze, because his body didn't, but his choices did. Kellen's eyes gleamed. "That's what I thought." Grant's jaw clenched so hard it hurt. He kept his voice calm, controlled. "Let her go." Kellen pressed the muzzle harder. "You step into that tunnel, Maddox, and I paint the walls with her." Lila's eyes met Grant's. She shook with terror, but she mouthed something, barely visible. "Don't." Grant didn't move. Outside, the pounding at the station doors got louder. Voices shouted. Someone demanded Kellen's name. The storm masked some of it, but not all. Kellen didn't look at the door. He kept watching Grant. "Here's how this ends," Kellen said softly. "You and your club walk away. You forget what you saw. You leave my town. And I let her live." Grant's eyes flicked to the ceiling camera again, then to the front desk clerk, still crouched and sobbing, hands over her head. A witness. Then Grant made a choice that didn't look like a choice. He slowly lowered his hands and stepped away from the tunnel entrance. 2 steps, controlled, like he was obeying. Kellen's smile returned, thin. "Good." Grant raised his voice, not shouting, just loud enough for the ceiling camera to hear. "You're holding Lila Hart at gunpoint," Grant said clearly. "In your station, after her daughter identified your tunnel, your barn cages, and St. Alara Clinic." Kellen's eyes widened a fraction. "Shut up," Grant kept going. "Deputy Harlan brought my man cap from a back room. You ordered your deputies to lock it down. You just threatened to kill a witness." Kellen hissed through clenched teeth. "I said shut up." Grant looked straight at the camera and spoke like he was reading a statement. "Time is 10:18 p.m. Sheriff Kellen is armed. Lila Hart is unarmed. There are children involved. This is being recorded." Kellen's grip tightened on Lila's arm. His pistol shook, not from fear, from rage that he couldn't control the narrative anymore. Outside, the station doors slammed again. This time, the impact was heavier, coordinated. The front lock groaned. Kellen's eyes flicked toward it, just for a second. That was Grant's second. He didn't dive at Kellen. He didn't wrestle a gun away like a movie. He did the only thing that worked in real life. He threw a stapler. It wasn't dramatic. It was fast. It hit Kellen's wrist with a sharp crack. Kellen's gun hand jerked sideways involuntarily. The muzzle swung off Lila's head. Grant surged forward and slammed his forearm into Kellen's chest, driving him back into the hallway wall. Lila stumbled free, blanket slipping from her shoulders. Kellen snarled and tried to bring the gun back up, and the front doors of the station burst inward with a boom that shook the building. Cold rain rushed in. So did the Thunder Rooks. Not 2, not 10, dozens, flooding the lobby with cameras up and hands visible, shouting, "On the ground! Hands open!" Kellen's deputies froze, caught between orders and the sudden reality of being filmed by a wall of bikers and locals who had followed the noise. Grant shoved Lila toward the tunnel door. "Go!" he snapped. "Down! Now!" Lila didn't hesitate. She ran, bare feet slapping tile, toward the tunnel like a woman running out of a grave. Kellen swung his gun toward Grant, but Moose was already back on him, a human freight train. Moose hit Kellen from the side, driving him into the wall and trapping his gun arm. Kellen screamed, rage, not pain. Grant grabbed the tunnel door and slammed it halfway shut behind Lila, buying her seconds. Then Grant turned and saw something that made his blood go ice cold again. Harlan wasn't frozen. Harlan had slipped into the lobby crowd, using the chaos, moving toward the front desk where Juno's USB photos had been seen on a screen. He wasn't going for a gun. He was going for the evidence. Grant started toward him, and at that exact moment from outside the station, a voice shouted from the rain, "Fire! The clinic's on fire!" Everything stopped. Kellen's head snapped toward the door. Grant's chest tightened, because if St. Hilaire burned, so did the proof. And so did whoever was locked behind that restricted door. "Fire! The clinic's on fire!" The words hit the station like a stun grenade. For a split second, even the deputies stopped moving. Not out of compassion, out of panic. Because fire didn't care who wore a badge. Grant's head snapped toward the open doors. Rain blew in sideways, carrying smoke that didn't belong to a storm. Somewhere across town, a faint orange glow pulsed against the clouds like a heartbeat. Kellen twisted in Moose's grip, face slick with rage. "That's a lie," he hissed, but his eyes betrayed him. He recognized the color of consequences. Harlan didn't look toward the doors. He looked at the front desk, at the cameras, at the phones pointed everywhere, and then he made his move. He lunged for the clerk's station where the security monitor sat, the one that fed the ceiling cams. His hand shot out, grabbing the keyboard like he could erase reality fast enough. Grant saw it and moved, not toward the fire, not toward the doors, toward Harlan. "Don't touch it," Grant barked. Harlan's eyes flicked up, cold and focused. "You people don't understand," he snapped, and his fingers hit keys, fast, pulling up system menus. Grant closed the distance in 3 strides and slammed his palm down on the desk, stopping Harlan's hands. "I understand perfectly," Grant said low. "You're trying to disappear the proof." Harlan's jaw clenched. "There are kids back there." "Then why are you deleting cameras?" Grant shot back. Harlan's face twitched, and in that twitch was the truth. He wasn't trying to save kids. He was trying to save the machine. Moose growled from the hallway as Kellen fought like a cornered animal. "Grant, he's got a gun!" Kellen's pistol was trapped under Moose's forearm, but Kellen was still trying to angle it into daylight. Grant didn't look away from Harlan. "Step back." Harlan didn't. He reached for a drawer. Grant's hand shot out and yanked the drawer open first. Hard. Inside was a station-issued handgun in a lockbox and a stack of forms. Grant slammed the drawer shut before Harlan could grab anything, pinning Harlan's fingers just enough to make him hiss. "Back," Grant said again. Harlan's eyes flashed. He shoved hard, trying to break past Grant toward the tunnel door. Grant blocked him, shoulder to shoulder, and the desk chair flipped. The clerk screamed and bolted for the corner, crying. Outside, the rooks in the lobby were yelling into phones, shouting locations, coordinating like a response team. "Clinic's burning," someone shouted again. "People trapped." Grant's mind split into 2 tracks. Track 1. If St. Hilaire burned, Lila would die inside that restricted door, and so would whoever else was stored there. Track 2, if the station cameras got wiped, Kellen would sell the story as bikers invaded, and the town would cheer. He could not do both alone. Grant snapped his head toward Moose. "Moose, hold Kellen! Do not let him out! Cap, where are you?" Cap pushed through the lobby crowd, limping, face bruised. "Here." Grant grabbed Cap's shoulder, pulling him close so the station camera caught both faces. "You're taking Ava and Noah back through the tunnel," Grant said fast. "You get them out. You get them to our people. You do not stop. Cap's eyes widened. What about you? Grant's voice stayed flat. I'm going to the clinic. Cap swallowed. Grant, do it. Grant cut him off. Cap nodded once, hard. Copy. Grant turned to Juno, who was already scanning the room, phone in hand, USB proof in her pocket like a heartbeat. Juno, Grant said, you go with Cap. Stay on the kids, keep recording, upload what you can. Juno's jaw tightened. And Lila? Grant glanced toward the tunnel door. Lila had disappeared into the darkness seconds ago. She's in the tunnel already. She'll meet them on the other side. Ava's voice cracked from somewhere behind the desk. She'd slipped back in during the chaos, eyes wild. Mom's still in the clinic. Grant's chest tightened. He crouched, grabbed Ava gently by the shoulders. Listen to me, he said. You did everything right. You saved your brother. You got us the tunnel. Now you go with Cap and Juno. If you stay, you die. And if you die, your mom has nothing to come back to. Ava's lips trembled. She wanted to argue. Then she swallowed the urge like she'd swallowed hunger for too long. She nodded. Noah clung to her jacket, sobbing quietly. Cap grabbed them both and moved toward the tunnel door. Harlan saw it and surged forward. Grant stepped into his path like a wall. Not happening, Grant said. Harlan's voice rose, cracking now. If they get out, we're finished. Grant stared at him. So it's about you. Harlan swung, an open hand strike meant to shove Grant aside. Grant caught his wrist and twisted, using leverage, not strength, driving Harlan sideways into the desk edge. Harlan grunted, wind knocked out. Then Harlan did something desperate. He screamed. He's got a gun, Harlan shouted, pointing at Grant. It was a lie, and it was clever, because it was the kind of lie that gave nervous deputies permission to shoot. 2 deputies raised their pistols at once. Drop it, one shouted. Grant froze, palms up, empty. I don't have a gun, but fear doesn't listen. The deputy's finger tightened, and then Moose roared, a sound that ripped the air open. Cameras, Moose bellowed. Look at his hands. Dozens of phones swung toward Grant. The station ceiling cam stared down. The lobby was a wall of lenses. The deputy hesitated, seeing the optics. Harlan's face twisted with fury. He reached again for the keyboard, trying to kill feeds. Grant slammed the keyboard off the desk, hard, sending it skittering across tile like a dead animal. Not today, Grant said. He turned toward the open doors. Smoke was thicker now, visible even through rain. The orange glow had grown. The clinic fire was real. Kellen stopped fighting for half a second and smiled, breathless. Too late, he rasped at Moose. That building goes up and everything in it goes away. Moose's eyes went murderous. You did it. Kellen's smile widened. I fixed it. Grant's gut went cold. He couldn't wait for warrants. He couldn't wait for state. People were burning right now. Grant looked at Moose. Keep him here, he said, alive, on camera. Moose's voice was a growl. Go. Grant sprinted out into the rain. The street was chaos, bikes lining the curb, headlights cutting through sheets of water, locals gathering under awnings. Everyone's face was turned toward the distant glow. Grant shoved through bodies and jumped into his truck, engine already running from earlier. He slammed it into gear and tore down the road, wipers thrashing, tires slicing water. As he drove, his earpiece crackled, Juno's voice tight and moving fast. We're in the tunnel with Ava and Noah. Lila found them. She's with us. She's barely standing, Grant. Grant swallowed hard. Keep them moving. Get out. Juno. What about you? Grant's eyes locked on the glow ahead. I'm going to get her. The clinic came into view like a nightmare. St. Alara's sign still lit, green leaf and cross glowing above a building that was starting to exhale smoke from its roofline. Flames weren't roaring yet, but they were there, behind windows, licking like tongues in a mouth. 2 vehicles were in the back lot, the transport van and Harlan's cruiser, and the back door was open. Grant slammed the truck to a stop, jumped out, and ran toward the rear entrance, rain making the pavement slick. Inside, alarms blared, shrill, constant. Sprinklers hissed, raining inside the rain. Smoke curled along the ceiling, thick and gray. Someone shouted down the hall. Get them out! Move! Boots pounded. Grant pushed through the service corridor where the nurse station had been. The 2 scrub women were gone. The security guard was gone. The restricted door was still there. So was the muffled pounding from behind it, weaker now, desperate. Ava, the voice called again, hoarse. Grant's chest clenched. "Lila," he whispered, but she wasn't here. He ran to the door. The keypad blinked red. The maglock hummed. No fob, no code, no time. Smoke thickened, stinging his eyes. Grant yanked a fire extinguisher off the wall and swung it into the keypad housing. Once, twice. Plastic cracking, sparks snapping. The door didn't open. He swung again. The extinguisher dented metal. The keypad went dark. Still locked. "Come on," Grant muttered. He looked around. Pipes overhead, a maintenance panel on the wall, an electrical box bolted near the floor. Sprinklers and smoke meant a fire feed had likely tripped locks, unless Kellen's people had wired it to fail secure. Of course they had. Grant dropped to his knees and ripped open the electrical box panel with his fingers and the extinguisher edge. Wires, a diagram, labels. He wasn't an electrician, but he didn't need perfect. He needed open. He found the maglock line and yanked it free. A spark bit his hand. The hum stopped. The door clicked. Grant slammed his shoulder into it and it swung inward. Hot air hit him like a wall. Inside was a room of narrow beds. No charts, no monitors, no names. Just bodies. Women, maybe 2 men. Pale faces, wrists bruised, eyes wide with panic and smoke. And in the nearest bed, half sitting, coughing, hair matted, eyes blown wide, Lila Hart. But not the Lila from the station, another woman, another mother. Grant's blood turned to ice because he understood in one instant. The woman at the station wasn't the only leverage. Kellen had multiple Lilas, multiple families. And this fire wasn't just a cover-up. It was a purge. A voice rasped from deeper in the room, almost lost under alarms and coughing. "Please, the kids." Grant turned his head toward the far corner. A shadow on a bed lifted weakly. A woman with dark hair, face bruised, eyes the same exact shape as Ava's. She coughed and whispered, "Ava." Grant's chest locked. That was her. That was Ava's mother. And flames suddenly licked along the upper doorway frame behind him, heat surging, smoke thickening fast. The exit he'd come through was starting to go. Heat surged through the doorway like a living thing. The corridor behind Grant was filling fast, smoke thickening, sprinkler water turning the floor into a slick mirror. The alarms didn't feel like warnings anymore. They felt like a countdown. Ava's mother, dark hair, bruised cheek, eyes glassy from smoke, lifted her head again, coughing so hard her whole body shook. "Ava," she rasped. Grant moved to her bed in one stride and dropped to a knee. "She's alive," he said, loud enough for her to hear over the chaos. "She's out. She's with your son. She's with our people." Her eyes widened, tears mixing with sweat. "Noah?" "Out," Grant said. "Both of them." The relief that hit her was so sharp she almost collapsed. Then she grabbed his sleeve with trembling fingers, desperate. The others, Grant looked around the room. Too many beds, too many faces, people coughing, choking, trying to sit up but too weak. This wasn't a clinic. It was storage. And Kellen had just set it on fire. Grant ripped the blanket off Ava's mom, wrapped it around her shoulders, then scooped her up, careful with bruises, firm enough to keep her moving. "Listen," he said into her ear. "Can you walk?" She shook her head, coughing. Not far." "Then you're not walking," Grant replied. He turned and scanned for the best exit. The main door behind him was already losing the fight, flames licking near the top frame, smoke pouring in harder each second. Sprinklers hissed, but they were losing. He saw it, a narrow service door at the far end of the room, half hidden by a curtain divider, marked with a small sign, "Staff only." He shifted Ava's mom higher in his arms and ran. Someone grabbed his boot in panic, an older woman on a bed, eyes wide, voice shredded. "Please!" Grant stopped for half a second because he couldn't not. He leaned down, yanked a sheet free, and threw it over her face to filter smoke. "Breathe through this," he said fast. "Stay low. Crawl if you have to. Help each other." It wasn't enough, and he knew it, and it tore at him anyway. He sprinted to the service door and shoved. It didn't budge, locked. Grant cursed under his breath and slammed his shoulder into it. The metal rattled, but the lock held. He shifted Ava's mom onto the floor for 1 second, only one, and ripped the fire extinguisher from his grip again. He hammered the lock housing, once, twice, a third time. The metal gave with a crack. The door swung open into a back stairwell. Clean air hit them like salvation. Grant scooped Ava's mom up again and barreled down the stairs, boots splashing through pooled sprinkler water. Smoke drifted into the stairwell behind them, but slower. The fire hadn't claimed this path yet. He burst out into the back lot. Rain slammed into his face, cold, brutal, perfect. The orange glow of flames pulsed in the clinic windows. Smoke poured from the roofline now, visible even through storm. And in the back lot, near the transport van, two men were struggling with something, trying to load a gurney, trying to get out before the building became a tomb. They froze when they saw Grant carrying a woman. One of them raised a pistol. Grant didn't slow. He kept running straight at them like a man with nothing left to lose. "Drop it!" the man shouted. Grant's voice was a growl. "Move!" The man's gun wavered, because a woman's head was lolling against Grant's shoulder, coughing, alive, and the fire behind them made everything look like judgment. Grant reached the van and grabbed the sliding door handle with his free hand. Locked. Of course. He kicked the door panel hard enough to dent it. The man with the pistol stepped forward. I said, a bike engine ripped through the rain behind them, then another, then a wall of thunder. The thunderrooks flooded the back lot. Not 2, not 10, dozens, spreading wide, lights cutting through rain, phones up, cameras rolling, bodies forming a moving perimeter. The man with the gun looked over his shoulder and panicked, because this wasn't an ambush anymore. This was exposure. "Hands open!" someone shouted. "On camera!" The gunman hesitated. That hesitation saved lives. Grant shoved Ava's mom into the van anyway, through the front passenger door that wasn't locked. He got her onto the seat, pushed her head back, kept her upright so she could breathe. Then he turned. The second man bolted toward Harlan's cruiser. Grant sprinted after him through rain, caught him at the trunk, and slammed him face first onto the hood. The man screamed. Grant didn't punch him. He just pinned him and ripped the keys off his belt. Moose's voice thundered from somewhere in the lot, barking orders like a battle captain. "Med kit! Get water! Keep phones up!" Juno's voice crackled in Grant's ear, breathless, moving. "Grant, we're out of the tunnel. Ava and Noah are with Lila. She's with us. Where are you?" Grant looked at Ava's mom in the passenger seat, coughing, alive. His throat tightened. "I have her," he said. "I have Ava's mom." A beat of silence, then a sound from Juno's side that wasn't words. Ava, somewhere offline, sobbing. Grant swallowed hard. "Get them to my truck, back lot, now." He turned back to the clinic. More people were stumbling out. 2 women, 1 man, coughing, soaked, half blind from smoke. Rooks ran to them with water bottles and jackets. Not heroes on a stage, just bodies doing what bodies could. Then the clinic roofline flared, hotter, brighter, like the building finally decided it was done pretending. Someone shouted, "Back, back!" Grant backed away, rain and heat colliding on his face. Sirens finally arrived, real ones this time. Not Kellen's controlled siren at the farm, multiple, fast, coming hard through the storm. State, fire, maybe federal. The backlot filled with flashing lights. And because Juno had already pushed files, because phones had already captured Kellen's gun on Lila's head, because the barn cages were recorded, because the clinic logs were copied. The story couldn't be buried with smoke. Minutes later, Grant's truck rolled into position under flashing red and blue. The passenger door opened, and Ava and Noah spilled out into the rain, running like their bodies had been holding that sprint for years. Ava hit the passenger seat first, climbing up on the slick step, hands reaching. "Mom!" Ava's mother lifted her head, eyes searching through tears and rain. "Ava!" They collided, arms, blankets, sobs, clinging so hard it looked like they were trying to stitch themselves back together with pure force. Noah scrambled up too, smaller hands grabbing whatever he could, blanket, sleeve, hair, crying into his mother's shoulder like he needed proof she wasn't going to vanish again. Grant stepped back and let it happen, just stood in rain and smoke and watched a family come back from the edge. Behind them, Moose kept Kellen alive, on his knees, hands zip-tied, face white with fury, while phones recorded every second. Harlan was in cuffs too, shouting excuses that sounded smaller every time someone replayed Ava's voice in the station hallway. And when the first state investigator arrived and demanded what happened, Grant didn't argue. He handed over the USB. He pointed to the live streams. He pointed to the burn marks on the clinic door and the tunnel access and the van plates Cap had taken. There was no story left to spin, only evidence. Days later, the storm had passed, but the town felt like it still had thunder trapped in its walls. Kellen's arrest wasn't quiet. It couldn't be. Not after everything hit the feed, not after the clinic log surfaced, not after the barn footage made the rounds, not after federal agents walked into June's diner and asked Marlene to repeat on paper what she'd seen. Marlene did, hands shaking, but she did it. And when Ava and Noah were finally given a hot meal without flinching, they ate slow, like they were learning how to trust food again. Grant visited them once, not with speeches, not with a patchy promise. He brought a small bag from the diner, pancakes to go, still warm, and hot chocolate with extra whipped cream, because someone had once tried to take that away from them too. Ava looked up at him and whispered, "You came back," Grant nodded. "I said I would." Noah stared at Grant's vest, then at the door like he expected it to burst open and drag them away. "Is it over?" he asked. Grant didn't lie to a kid who'd earned truth. "It's over for you," he said. The rest is going to take time." Ava's mother held both kids close, face still bruised but eyes awake now. "Thank you," she whispered to Grant, voice cracking. Grant shook his head once. "You don't thank people for doing what's right," he said. "You just remember it." That night, the Thunder Rooks rolled out of town in a long, steady line, 200 bikes cutting through clean air like a warning to any place that thought it could hide behind rain. They didn't leave a riot. They left a record. And in a diner booth under soft neon, where storms once forced strangers together, 2 kids finally ate until they were full. The last thing Ava did before she took another bite was glance at the door, then back at her mom, then back at her plate. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't flinch at the sound of boots.